Chapter 3096. Black Sand Giant. Seeing that his opponent was Sha Xian, Nietian didn't panic. Instead, he smiled and said, "I can use you to test the strength of the sky sword defying Sunday." Sha Xian was very strong. He had reached the fourth order pseudo-sacred realm and was a very powerful opponent. Nietian had just grasped the third move of the sacred heaven defying sword, sky sword defying Sunday. It was a good opportunity for him to test the power of the sky sword defying sun on Sha Xian. With a faint smile, Nietian's figure flashed, and he landed on the fighting ring. "Nietian, it's you." Sha Xian's eyes trembled when he saw Nietian. A cold smile appeared on his face, and he said, "Enemies are bound to meet on a narrow road." Previously, he wanted to kill Feng Qi, but was stopped by Nietian. He hated Nietian for a long time. Now that his opponent was Nietian, he couldn't help but feel excited. "Looks like you really want to kill me." Nietian smiled and stood with his hands behind his back. His eyes were as calm as water. "Humph." Sha Xian smiled at Nietian and said, "Nietian, you were in the limelight in the first 2 rounds. I admit that you're very talented. Even I can't compare to you. But you're only a 9th order pseudo-sacred. You're no match for me. I could give you a chance to live. As long as you kneel and beg for mercy, kowtow to me 100 times and admit defeat, I'll spare your life. How about it?" He raised his brows with a provocative and disdainful look. Everyone couldn't help but frown when they heard Sha Xian's words. This guy is too arrogant. His opponent is Nietian, but he dares to ask Nietian to admit defeat. How arrogant. That's right. Nietian even killed the variant ghost demon infant. Does he think he's stronger than the variant ghost demon infant? Although Nietian is only a demi-saint, his combat ability is probably stronger than that of an ordinary demi-saint. This guy is just a rank 4 pseudo-saint. Yet he dares to be so arrogant in front of Nietian? Isn't he courting death? The crowd discussed in low voices. They were actually very confident in Nietian. After all, Nietian had proven his strength by killing the deviant ghost devil infant Yin Wuyu in a domineering manner. On the other hand, Sha Xian had yet to meet a truly strong opponent. Kowtowing and admitting defeat doesn't suit me. On the fighting ring, the corner of Nietian's mouth twitched. He smiled cold and said, "I think you will kowtow and admit defeat." Arrogant. Sha Xian laughed coldly. After that, he moved. Endless amounts of black sand gushed out from his body. It was as sharp as a blade, and rumbling sounds rang out, as if it wanted to tear the heavens and earth apart. Nietian felt the violent aura coming at him. His eyes narrowed slightly. Suddenly, a towering sword will surged out from his body. Starry heavenly slash appeared in his hand, and he slashed at the void. Kaboom! Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. A 10,000-meter-long sword shadow descended and bombarded the black sand that filled the sky, forcibly breaking through the black sand blades. High up in the sky, Nietian and Sha Xian retreated and stood coldly in the air. What a powerful force! The crowd looked at the fighting ring with trembling eyes. The strength that Sha Xian had displayed was beyond their expectations. Although Sha Xian only had the strength of a rank 4 pseudo-saint, his combat ability was comparable to a rank 5 pseudo-saint or even a rank 6 pseudo-saint. No wonder he dared to provoke Nietian like that. "Nietian, you're not bad. It seems that I have underestimated you." Sha Xian stood in the air and laughed coldly. His body was surging with terrifying black sand, and his eyes were filled with violence. He had originally thought that Nietian would not be able to withstand his black sand attack. He had not expected that Nietian's strength was much stronger than he had imagined. "You're not bad either. At least, you're much stronger than I had imagined." Nietian also smiled and said lightly. He had underestimated Sha Xian's strength. Sha Xian had a wild force in his body that made his martial body far stronger than martial artists of the same level. His combat ability was even more terrifying. However, Nietian was not afraid. The stronger Sha Xian was, the more intense his battle intent was. Black Sand Burial. At that moment, Sha Xian made another move. As he thrust his palm out, the black sand in the air instantly condensed into a huge hand made of black sand that slammed down towards Nietion. Starry Sky 9 Limits Sky Slash. Nietion's eyes narrowed, and the corner of his mouth twitched. The 9 yuan meridians in his body were operating wildly as he swung his sword at the giant hand of black sand. Kaboom! In the next moment, the terrifying sword shadow fell and split the giant hand of black sand apart. The black sand in the air scattered like sharp blades. Die! Immediately afterwards, Nietion let out a fierce roar as he blurred into motion and slashed his sword towards Sha Xian at lightning speed. Boom! The sound of a sword rang out in the air. The huge sword shadow was like a giant dragon as it rushed toward Sha Xian in a frenzy. What a powerful sword! The crowd saw the scene and felt the sword momentum in the air. Their eyes trembled violently as they cried out in shock. Everyone thought that Sha Xian would be dead the moment the sword fell. If they had not seen it with their own eyes, they would have found it hard to believe that a rank 9 demi-saint martial artist could unleash such a terrifying sword. Nietion, it's impossible for you to kill me with such strength. But at this moment, Sha Xian's deep roar resounded in the sky. Then, the huge battle platform began to shake, and the black sand in the air became even more violent as it rapidly condensed toward Sha Xian. Roar! In the next moment, a thunderous roar suddenly resounded on the battle platform. Then, something strange happened. A giant made of black sand appeared in the endless black sand. The eyes of everyone trembled, and they couldn't help but gasp. They were shocked to the point of being speechless. The black sand giant stood in the air above the battle platform. It was 10,000 meters tall, and its entire body was made of black sand. However, it looked very compact and extremely tough. That roar just now was from the black sand giant. Kaboom! Then the black sand giant moved. It waved its huge arm in the air and shattered the huge sword shadow that was descending on it. Nietion could not help but frown when he saw that. Then he felt a huge pressure coming at him. His astral soul wings immediately appeared on his back as he retreated. His reaction was fast, but he was still a step too late. Boom! A dull sound rang out in the air. Nietion's figure was directly sent flying. His body trembled in the air as he spat out a mouthful of blood. Oh no! He was still in the air, but his expression suddenly changed as he cried out in shock. With his current momentum, he was about to rush out of the battle platform. If he rushed out of the battle platform, he would lose according to the Heaven's Choice contest. Chapter 3097. Sun-defying sword. The crowd stared intently at Nietion, who was in midair. They were extremely nervous and did not even dare to breathe heavily. If Nietion were to be knocked out of the fighting ring by Sha Xian, the battle would be over. Nietion, who had created miracles on the Heaven's Choice platform and the Doomsday Hunt, would be defeated in such a manner. On the fighting platform, Sha Xian exclaimed in surprise. Then, a huge black sand hand appeared and grabbed towards Nietion. Sha Xian was extremely nervous that Nietion was about to be knocked out of the fighting ring. His goal was not just to defeat Nietion. He wanted to kill Nietion. Nietion had saved Feng Qi and saved the person he wanted to kill. Sha Xian hated him very much, so he had to kill Nietion to vent his hatred. Swoosh! In midair, Nietion's eyes trembled slightly. Then a bone-corroding, soul-shackling chain surged out of his body and grabbed hold of the black sand hand. Then he moved, and the bone-corroding, soul-shackling chain suddenly increased his speed. At the same time, sword intent surged out of his body, and he slashed down with the Starlight Heavenly Slash. Sacred Heaven Defying Sword. Earth Sword engulfs the moon. As the deep voice rang out, a massive sword shadow descended with a loud rumble. A blinding sword gleam shot out for tens of thousands of meters, and the brilliance of the sword blossomed in the surrounding void. The violent sword shadow slashed down on the black sand giant. So strong. When the crowd saw this scene, their eyes trembled violently, and they all cried out in surprise. No one had expected that Nietian would not be knocked out of the fighting ring. Instead, he would use the black sand giant to counterattack. Bang! In the next instant, the huge sword shadow fell like a huge waterfall and slashed the black sand giant's shoulder. A muffled explosion sounded in the air. Roar! Immediately, the black sand giant let out a deep roar as its huge arm was chopped off. Bang! 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 After the shocking scene, the black sand giant's huge body retreated in the air, causing the void to tremble. What a terrifying sword strike! The crowd exclaimed. They did not expect Nietian to be so powerful that he could cut off the black sand giant's arm with a single strike. Nietian stood still in midair, the corners of his mouth curling up into a fierce smile, his eyes incomparably grim. Nietian, you have angered me. At that moment, the black sand giant roared. Its gigantic body shook in the air, and its severed arm reformed. Nietian frowned when he saw this. He could tell that the black sand giant's remolding ability was very strong, but he did not expect it to recover in an instant. Compared to Yin Wuyu, Sha Xian was much more difficult to deal with. This was because his absolute strength was stronger, and he could not be countered. Nietian, can you win this match? The Heaven's Chosen One looked at Nietian from afar, and the corners of his mouth rose as he thought to himself. Although Nietian was at a disadvantage, the star had a feeling that Nietian's strength was far greater than this. She only hoped that Sha Xian would be able to force Nietian to use a stronger trump card. The strongest opponent she had arranged for Nietian was the #1 genius of the Juying Shrine, Shadow Fire Destroyer. Looking at the black sand giant, a cold smile appeared at the corner of Nietian's mouth as he said in a deep voice, "Come on, let me see how strong your black sand giant is. You're courting death." Sha Xian let out a low roar, and the black sand giant immediately started charging towards Nietian like a moving mountain. Suddenly, heaven and earth shook and the void trembled. Black sand filled the air, covering the sky and plunging everything into darkness. "You're the one courting death." Nietian's lips curled into a cold smile. He took a step forward and raised the starry sky, slash in his hand. His sword intent soared to the extreme in an instant. Waves of sword intent soared into the sky, sharp as a blade, as if it could tear everything apart. How is this possible? At this moment, everyone felt that Nietian's sword intent was several times stronger than before. They couldn't help but gasp in shock. Originally, they thought that Nietian had pushed his sword intent to the extreme. They didn't think that Nietian had been hiding his true strength. Sha Xian exclaimed in surprise when he felt the pressure of the sword intent. But at this moment, he had no way out. He could only face it head-on. If he retreated now, he would only die a more miserable death. Defying Saint Heaven's sword, defying Sun's sword. At this time, Nietian's lips curled into a smile. The starry sky descended, drawing a perfect arc in the air. Suddenly, the space couldn't bear the pressure of the sword. It let out a low groan as if it was going to be torn apart in the next moment. No! At this moment, Sha Xian cried out in shock when he felt the enormous pressure bearing down on him. But it was too late. Boom! Bam, bam, bam! The massive sword shadow crashed down, and the void rumbled. Immediately, the violent power within the sword intent was released. The massive black sand giant could not withstand the terrifying pressure, and it collapsed in an instant. Rumble. The moment the black sand giant exploded, black sand filled the air and covered the sky. The entire fighting ring was submerged in black sand. Boom! At this moment, a dazzling sword shadow descended, breaking through the black sand and slashed at a figure on the fighting ring. No! Sha Xian's scream resounded in the sky. He seemed even more desperate and helpless than before. This! The crowd couldn't help but gasp when they saw the scene on the fighting ring. Their eyes were filled with extreme shock. Who would have thought that the seemingly powerful black sand giant would be destroyed by Nietian's sword? The power of Nietian's sword was beyond imagination. At this moment, through the sword radiance, everyone could see that Nietian was going to kill Sha Xian. Amidst the black sand, yet Tion's laughter was heard. It was filled with a sinister aura. Boom! In the next moment, the violent sword shadow whistled, and the terrifying pressure of the sword arrived. However, it didn't completely descend. Bang! Sha Xian felt a terrifying pressure. His knees went soft, and he knelt on the ground. Sha Xian, I told you that you will kowtow and admit defeat. Nie Tion's figure descended, and the violent pressure of the sword enveloped Sha Xian. It was extremely terrifying. Sha Xian's eyes trembled, and his expression was extremely ugly. He was unwilling to admit defeat, but in the end, he still kowtowed. The corner of his mouth trembled, but he couldn't speak. Oof! Nie Tion stared at Sha Xian with a murderous look in his eyes. The corner of his mouth rose into a cold arc as he said coldly, "Yeah, that's it. I want to see you kneel and beg for mercy. But I won't let you go. You." When Sha Xian heard Nie Tion's words, he suddenly lifted his head and his eyes trembled. He wanted to say something, but he didn't have the chance to. Chapter 3098. Return it to Yuhis. What happened on the fighting ring was clearly seen by everyone, and they couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Nie Tion was too cruel. Sha Xian had already knelt down and begged for mercy, but he still killed him without hesitation. Compared to Nie Tion was too merciful when he fought for the top 64. After Nie Tion killed Sha Xian, the black sand on the fighting platform disappeared and the sky became clear again. The Saint Envoy looked at Nie Tion and his eyes narrowed. He seemed to want to say something, but he did not. Nie Tion's ruthlessness had exceeded his expectations. Originally, he thought that Nie Tion would not have such a strong mind at such a young age. But now, it seemed that he was completely wrong. Nie Tion was much stronger than he had imagined. Nie Tion was strong not only because of his talent and strength, but also because of his mind. Talent was only one aspect of a cultivator's success in the martial way. Martial will was more important. If one's martial will was not strong, no matter how talented he was, he would not be able to go far. The martial will that the divine envoy of heaven's chosen sensed in Nie Tion made him tremble with fear. He had seen countless geniuses in the sacred world. He had even seen geniuses who stood at the peak of the sacred world. But the difference between their martial will and Nie Tion's was too great. If he was born in the sacred world, he would definitely be the most monstrous genius, the Saint Envoy thought to himself as he looked at Nie Tion's back. At the beginning of the test, he had thought that Nie Tion was a weirdo. But now his understanding of Nie Tion had completely changed. Vaguely, he felt that the Saint Envoy was going to lose. This time, the Star Chief would definitely be Nie Tion. Nie Tion walked off the fighting platform with a calm expression and a faint smile on his face. He didn't expect the power of Sky Sword-defying Sun to be so strong. The moon-swallowing Earth Sword had only cut off one of the Black Sand Giant's arms, while the Sky Sword-defying Sun had directly killed the Black Sand Giant. The most terrifying thing was that the Sky Sword-defying Sun had increased the power of Nie Tion's sword intent by several times, which is why the Black Sand Giant was unable to recover. Nie Tion, your sacred heaven-defying sword is resonating with the heavenly Tao formation. If you can fuse the sacred heaven-defying sword into the heavenly Tao formation and comprehend the sword formation, your battle prowess will increase once again, the Ghost Emperor said excitedly. The reason why Nie Tion was able to comprehend the Sky Sword reversing Yang was precisely related to the heavenly Tao array within his body. Nie Tion also sensed that there was indeed some sort of resonance between the heavenly Tao formation and the sacred heaven-defying sword. It was very mysterious. If he could fuse the sacred heaven-defying sword into the heavenly law formation and comprehend a sword formation, it would be truly terrifying. I won't pay attention to the following battles. Focus on comprehending the heavenly Tao formation. Nie Tion thought for a moment, then nodded. He had originally wanted to pay attention to the following battles, but now he felt that increasing his own strength was undoubtedly more important. The Ghost Emperor nodded. This Emperor will activate the heavenly Tao formation's array intent. Focus on comprehending it. All right, Nie Tion agreed. unable to conceal the excitement in his heart. Next, Nie Tian went to Feng Shutong and the others and directly entered a state of cultivation, focusing on comprehending the heavenly Tao formation. Soon, 6 days passed. The top 32 battles were over, and the top 16 of the Heaven's Choice tournament were born. Other than the Rakshasa, Maiden Yuluo, who had been unexpectedly eliminated, the other experts had all advanced to the top 16. Nie Tian stood up, his brows slightly furrowed. His expression was not very good. Although he had comprehended the heavenly Tao formation with the Ghost Emperor's help, he still felt that something was missing. It was that slight obstacle that prevented him from comprehending the sword formation. Nie Tian, don't be discouraged. Although you didn't comprehend the sword formation, your sword intent has already become much stronger under the stimulation of the heavenly law formation. At this moment, the Ghost Emperor spoke. Yeah, Nie Tian nodded and forced a smile at the corner of his mouth. In these 6 days, his sword intent had indeed improved by quite a bit. The power of the heavenly law originated from the heavenly sacred heart and contained the power of the heaven and earth Tao. It was not strange for it to stimulate the sword intent. Nie Tian, the top 16 battles are coming up. You must be careful. Lord Heaven's Choice Venerable will definitely arrange stronger opponents for you. At this moment, Feng Shutong came to Nie Tian's side and transmitted his voice. With his intelligence, he could already tell that Heaven's Choice Venerable had been targeting Nie Tian and had been arranging stronger opponents for him. I know. Nie Tian smiled faintly, his eyes filled with determination. In his opinion, Heaven's Choice Venerable's arrangement wasn't a bad thing. On the contrary, it was beneficial to him. If his opponents were all weaklings, what was the point of such battles? Nie Tian, I hope we can meet in the top 16 battles. At this moment, a gloomy voice rang out. A figure appeared, staring coldly at Nie Tian. It was Shadowfire Ruinous Star. Shadowfire Ruinous Star, don't worry. There will definitely be a battle between us. Nie Tian looked at Shadowfire Ruinous Star, his eyes filled with killing intent. He said cold, a battle of life and death. We will only stop when we die. Shadowfire Ruinous Star looked at Nie Tian and smiled cold. He said, Nie Tian, do you think you can kill me? You can't kill the army destroyer of Juying Temple. If I can kill you once, I can kill you twice, thrice, 10 times, 10,000 times. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched as he said, I'd like to see how many lives you have, and what is this so-called Alcade you speak of? Shadowfire Ruinous Star's eyes darkened. He said cold, we'll see. Then he walked away. As soon as Shadowfire Ruinous Star left, another figure appeared. His entire body was covered with a cold aura. His eyes were extremely dark, as if he wanted to devour someone. This figure was none other than another strong cultivator, Dao Hanyu. Nie Tian, your life is mine. Dao Hanyu's eyes were as cold as ice as he stared fixedly at Nie Tian and said, word by word, I'll return the same words to you. Nie Tian replied cold with a smile. He had killed Dao Hanyu's sworn brother, the bloodthirsty wolf. The two of them were irreconcilable enemies. Dao Hanyu was very strong. He was already a fifth-order false saint. In Nie Tian's eyes, he was second only to Shadowfire Ruinous Star. Shadowfire Ruinous Star and Dao Hanyu would be the biggest obstacles to Nie Tian's ascension to the top. Battle of the top 16. First match, number 16 against number 3. At that moment, the voice of the Saint Envoy rang out on the platform. When Nie Tian and Dao Hanyu heard the words of the Heaven's Choice Saint Envoy, their eyes shone with a cold light. Number 16 was Nie Tian, and number 3 was Dao Hanyu. Chapter 3099. Frozen Saber Intent. Nie Tian, I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. You're really unlucky, Dao Hanyu said coldly as he regained his senses. His lips curled into a cold smile, and his eyes were filled with killing intent. The way I see it, you're the unlucky one, Nie Tian said with a faint smile. He didn't avoid Cold Rain's gaze in the slightest. The first battle of the top 16 is between the two of them. The crowd exclaimed in shock when they saw Nie Tian and Dao Hanyu. Everyone had witnessed Nie Tian's strength. As for Dao Hanyu, although he had not met anyone particularly strong, his cultivation base had already reached the 5th rank pseudo-holy realm. This was extremely terrifying. For a cultivator below the age of 10,000 to reach the 5th rank pseudo-holy realm meant that he was extremely talented. Furthermore, Dao Hanyu's eyes were extremely terrifying. His entire body emitted a terrifying chill. Just by standing there, everyone could feel a strong pressure. Furthermore, Nie Tian had killed the bloodthirsty wolf and had formed an irreconcilable feud with Dao Hanyu. Hence, everyone was looking forward to the battle between the two. Nie Tian, you're dead meat. At this moment, Dao Hanyu's lips curled into a cold smile as he stepped onto the fighting ring. Nie Tian, you have to be careful. This person's aura is extremely strong. He's definitely going to be a tough opponent. Feng Shutong looked at Nie Tian and said in a deep voice. His eyes were filled with unease. He could sense a terrifying aura from Dao Hanyu, and he could not help but worry for Nie Tian. Nie Tian, the frost energy in this person's body is no weaker than my frost chi. On the other side, Emo's figure appeared, and he frowned as he warned Nie Tian. Emo was someone who possessed frost chi and was extremely sensitive to frost energy. He could sense a terrifying frost energy from Dao Hanyu's body. It was even stronger than his frost chi. I know. Nie Tian smiled faintly as he suddenly lifted his head and looked at a figure on the other side. Looking at that peerlessly beautiful face, he nodded and smiled confidently. He had long noticed that Yu Luo had been watching him all along, just as she did not walk over. It was obvious that Yu Luo was worried about Nie Tian as well. Yes, Yu Luo looked at Nie Tian from afar. Her eyes flickered, and she nodded slightly. She felt an indescribable warmth in her heart, as if a warm current had flowed through it. She had never felt something like this before, and this caused a blush to appear on her pretty face, but quickly disappeared. Although it was only for a moment, this scene was perfectly captured by the 3 Rakshasa kings in the sky. Her Highness, the Holy Maiden, seems to be interested in that brat. This is not a good thing. Desolate Beginning's eyes narrowed as he transmitted his voice to the other 2 Rakshasa kings. Her Highness Saintess has never left the Rakshasa royal palace. This is the first time she has come out. It's not strange for her to be tempted by such a talented person. It's just that her identity is different, and she cannot be close to men. Another Rakshasa king frowned and said in a deep voice, "It doesn't matter. This brat is dead anyway. Once the heaven selection contest is over, I will personally kill him." Rakshasa King's eyes were as fierce as a wolf's as he said cold. The 3 Rakshasa Kings' eyes darkened, and they looked at Nie Tian with murderous intent. Nie Tian did not have the time to care about them. Under countless gazes, he moved and landed in the sky above the fighting ring. Nie Tian, seeing Nie Tian appear, the murderous intent in Dao Hanyu's eyes intensified. He smiled cold and said, "I admit that in the previous few battles, you have displayed great strength, far exceeding my expectations. But it's a pity that your opponent now is me. I, Dao Hanyu, am not someone those trash can compare to. Today, you will definitely die by my hands." Every single word was filled with killing intent, and it revealed a ghastly cold intent. Dao Hanyu was extremely arrogant. He did not take in Wu Yu, Sha Xian, and the rest seriously, and had even called them trash. Is that so? Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, and he smiled cold. He could sense an extremely terrifying power from Dao Hanyu's body. At this moment, this power was continuously increasing within Dao Hanyu's body. Dao Hanyu laughed coldly, and with a jerk of his body, a terrifying power gushed out from his body. It was extremely sharp, and it looked like numerous icy runes were floating in the air. Nie Tian looked at the icy runes around Dao Hanyu's body, and he could sense a hidden saber will. He could not help but narrow his eyes. Nie Tian, let me show you my true strength. In the next moment, Dao Hanyu shouted angrily, and his eyes were extremely cold. Then a strange scene happened. Boom! The ice runes that were surging around his body actually turned into saber intent in an instant, surging in the air, sharp and violent. Nietion's eyes darkened when he saw this, and he was extremely shocked. He did not expect Dao Hanyu to be a saber user. But previously, he did not sense any saber will from Dao Hanyu's body. Nietion, this man is so strong. At this moment, the Ghost Emperor seemed to have discovered something, and he exclaimed, he has actually merged saber will into his blood vessels. Upon hearing the Ghost Emperor's words, Nietion's eyes narrowed. No wonder he did not sense any saber will from Dao Hanyu's body. It turned out that Dao Hanyu had merged saber will into his blood vessels, and used the chi of his blood vessels to conceal his saber will. At this moment, Dao Hanyu's saber will was released, and it shocked Nietion greatly. Merging sword will into one's blood vessels was indeed rare, and it caught Nietion off guard. In the next moment, Nietion became much colder than before, and he could not help but exclaim, "Ultimate divine saber body!" Not only was Dao Hanyu a saber user, but he was also an ultimate divine saber body cultivator. To be able to achieve the ultimate divine saber body cultivator at such a young age, Dao Hanyu's talent in the saber Dao was shocking. How is this possible? Outside the fighting ring, the crowd could feel the aura of Dao Hanyu's saber will, and they could not help but exclaim in shock. Who would have thought that Dao Hanyu was hiding such a terrifying strength? No wonder he called Yin Wuyu, Sha Xian, and the rest trash. Merging saber will into his blood vessels, and the saber will and his bloodline will stimulate each other, resulting in an even stronger burst of power. Interesting. In the air, the heaven's chosen elder looked at Dao Hanyu, and the corners of his lips curled up into a smile. Dao Hanyu had indeed given her quite a pleasant surprise. Even she had not been able to tell that Dao Hanyu was such a powerful saber user. Nietion died. At this moment, Dao Hanyu's eyes turned cold, and he revealed his killing intent. He took a step forward, and the saber will surged from his body, and like a ripple, it spread out in the air. Chapter 3100. What a terrifying saber will. The crowd trembled as they watched the scene unfold on the fighting ring. They could not hide the fear in their eyes. The strength of Dao Hanyu's saber was beyond everyone's expectations. It was so terrifying that he could freeze time and space with his saber will. Boom! Crack, crack, crack. On the fighting ring, the terrifying ripples of blade essence continued to spread in all directions. The space was directly frozen, and the whole fighting ring instantly became a world of ice, as if it was a huge block of ice. At this point, Nietion's eyes darkened. He used his sword will to resist the terrifying saber will and forcefully opened up a space on the fighting ring. He had not expected Dao Hanyu's saber will to be so terrifying. It was beyond his expectations. Even though he had formed a shield with his sword will, it could not block the invasion of the icy saber will. The saber will in the air was like ice. It was so cold that it could penetrate Nietion's sword will shield and penetrate his martial body. It was about to freeze his martial body. Nietion, this guy's saber will is too strong. His blood meridian and saber will have almost merged into one and stimulated each other, increasing the power of his saber will by several times. Although he is only a divine saber body bladesman, his saber will is even stronger than a divine, profound saber body bladesman. Ghost Emperor said in a low voice. Dao Hanyu was indeed a genius. He could merge saber will and blood meridian to such an extent that it was almost perfect. It was no wonder that no one could tell that he was a saber body bladesman. His blood meridian and saber will stimulated each other, increasing Dao Hanyu's saber will by several times. Dao Hanyu was a divine saber body bladesman. Coupled with the stimulation of his blood meridian, his saber will was no weaker than a divine, profound saber body bladesman. On the other hand, Nietion was only a legendary swordsman. He was 2 realms lower than Dao Hanyu. Even if his sword will was strong, he could not make up for the difference. This kind of direct confrontation between sword intent and saber intent was very disadvantageous to Nietion. Ha ha! You little ant, to think that you would be able to retaliate against my saber will. What surprise! At this moment, Dao Hanyu's maniacal laughter rang out as he unleashed his saber will in a frenzy. In his opinion, it was already a miracle that a legendary swordsman who had fused sword and martial arts into one was able to resist his sword intent head-on. However, this miracle was destined to be short-lived. Nie Tian, I'll show you exactly how strong my cold rain saber intent is. Following that, Dao Hanyu let out a low growl and released his saber intent in a frenzy. His entire being was like an abyss of saber intent, constantly releasing sharp saber intent. Boom, boom, boom. In the void, the cold rain saber intent spread wildly, causing the heaven and earth to tremble violently. This person is so scary. The eyes of the spectators trembled even more intensely. The cold aura in the air made them feel as though all the yuan meridians in their bodies were about to be frozen. Dao Hanyu's saber intent was so strong that it made one's hair stand on end. Nie Tian could feel that the saber intent was getting stronger and the cold aura was getting scarier. His eyes narrowed slightly. Nie Tian, he wants to freeze you directly. You have to break through the pressure of the saber intent. At this moment, Ghost Emperor's voice rang out anxiously. However, Nie Tian acted as though he had not heard Ghost Emperor's words. He stood on the spot as though he was meditating. He did not move an inch and even close his eyes. Nie Tian, what are you doing? Ghost Emperor was taken aback for a moment before he let out a strange cry. Brat, you're courting death. Seeing that Nie Tian had closed his eyes, Dao Hanyu felt that he was being looked down upon. With a low growl, he struck out with a wild slash. In the next moment, a strange scene unfolded. Swoosh! In the frozen space above the fighting ring, Dao Hanyu's saber intent was able to travel freely, unhindered by the space. The saber intent condensed into a saber shadow that was like a fish swimming in the water, diving towards Nie Tian. In the process, the saber shadow continued to absorb the saber intent in the frozen space and grew stronger. Dao Hanyu's slash was extremely powerful, and its attacking power was unimaginable. More importantly, Nie Tian was trapped in the frozen space and had no way of dodging it. If this saber were to fall, Nie Tian's fate would be certain death. What they saw caused everyone's eyes to tremble in fear. Why is Nie Tian not moving? What is he doing? He closed his eyes. Could it be that he knows he can't escape death and has accepted his fate? Accept his fate? Nie Tian is a godly talent. Is he the kind of person who would accept his fate so easily? I think he's waiting for the right time to unleash his strongest attack. No one could understand what Nie Tian was doing at this moment. It was simply too bizarre. Nie Tian, Yuluo stood outside the fighting ring. She was extremely nervous and her eyes were trembling. It was obvious that she was worried about Nie Tian. At the same time, on the fighting ring, Nie Tian stood where he was like a wooden pillar and did not move an inch. However, something mysterious was happening within his body. His sword intent was like rain that slowly melted into the formation of heaven. The force of heaven was like the spring rain that nourished his sword intent and stimulated it to become even more powerful. Why now? Ghost Emperor immediately understood what Nie Tian was doing and growled anxiously. Nie Tian seemed to have comprehended it and was melding his sword intent with the formation of heaven. Previously, Nie Tian had tried to do this but failed. Now that he was in the middle of a battle, he suddenly comprehended it. However, this was a life or death moment. Nie Tian was undoubtedly risking his life. Boom! Just then, a mountainous saber shadow rolled over and attacked the frozen space, releasing a bone-chilling saber intent. 100 meters, 50 meters, 10 meters. In the blink of an eye, the saber shadow had arrived beside Nie Tian and was about to devour him. Boom! At this moment, Nie Tian suddenly opened his eyes, which were as bright as the stars. He suddenly released his sword intent, which was like a landslide and a tsunami, crashing into the void. Pung, pung, pung. His sword intent was much stronger than before. The moment it was released, the frozen space directly collapsed. QL-11 in the next moment, a pair of astral soul wings appeared on Nietion's back. He retreated abruptly and at the same time slashed out with his sword. The sword was like a dragon, and a monstrous sword intent bloomed in the air, releasing a dazzling brilliance. Boom! Immediately after, the saber and the sword collided, causing a deafening explosion in the air. Countless saber lights and sword shadows filled the air, transforming into a violent force that surged across the huge fighting ring. Boom, boom, boom. The saber intent and sword intent collided, causing endless explosions to resound in the air. Nietion retreated for a few thousand meters before stabilizing himself. However, there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth, but his face was filled with uncontrollable excitement. MHM. Dao Hanyu similarly retreated, but he only retreated about 100 meters before stabilizing himself. He wasn't injured in the slightest, but when he saw Nietion, his eyes couldn't help but tremble as he exclaimed in shock. Chapter 3101. Nietion stood proudly in the air as sword will surged from his body. His eyes were filled with coldness and a fiery glow. Nietion, I did not expect you to make a breakthrough in the midst of a battle. It seems like I have underestimated you. Dao Hanyu's eyes narrowed as he spoke coldly. Nietion was filled with killing intent. He had not expected Nietion to make a breakthrough in the Sword Dao realm in that moment of life and death. QL-11, it was because of Nietion's breakthrough in the Sword Dao that his sword will's strength increased by multiple folds, allowing him to break through Dao Hanyu sword will. Nietion, you're making my heart race. Just then, Ghost Emperor's voice rang out. Although he was displeased, his tone was filled with excitement. He had not expected Nietion to be so daring as to make a breakthrough in the face of death. Nietion smiled faintly, a faint smile appearing at the corner of his mouth. I had no other choice but to fight to the death. At that moment, he had no other choice but to fight with his life on the line. Based on his sword will, there was no way he could go against Dao Hanyu. Only by improving his sword will would he be able to fight Dao Hanyu head-on. Furthermore, he had to thank Dao Hanyu for making a breakthrough in that instant. Dao Hanyu's sword will was infused into his bloodline. This was similar to how Nietion had infused his sword will into his heavenly formation. Nietion had gained some enlightenment from Dao Hanyu's saber intent, which allowed him to successfully infuse his sword intent into the heavenly Dao formation. The heavenly formation had infused his sword will into his sword will, causing Nietion to make a breakthrough to the legendary Sword Soul realm. Nietion, who was at the legendary Sword Soul realm, was no match for Dao Hanyu. However, Nietion, who was at the legendary Sword Soul realm, was able to fight Dao Hanyu head-on. Only then did the spectators come to their senses. They all sucked in a breath of cold air and looked at Nietion with trembling eyes. Dao Hanyu was scary, but Nietion was even scarier. He had forcefully made a breakthrough in the face of death. Nietion, it's just as you said, our battle has only just begun. At this moment, Dao Hanyu's lips curled into a cold smile as he said in a low voice, I don't care how talented you are. You are dead today. Really? Nietionling replied with a smile. He took a step forward, and the sword shadows around his body surged. They were released like mountains and seas, surging in the void, making him look like a giant sword that stood between the heavens and the earth. Dao Hanyu sneered. His eyes darkened, and a black domineering saber appeared in his hand. It was his Yuan Ling saber, the Cold Rain Mystic Dragon Slash. Buzz! Following which, Dao Hanyu made his move. The Cold Rain Mysterious Dragon Slash slashed down ferociously. A towering saber intent was released like raging waves, pressing down on Nietion. The entire space shook violently, and even the heavens and earth shook. Kill! Nietion's eyes darkened. He showed no fear and chose to fight Dao Hanyu head-on. Boom! He slashed out with his sword. The sword's shadow was like a mountain, bursting with an incomparably majestic aura. Boom, boom, boom. Bang, bang, bang. In the next moment, the saber shadow and the sword shadow collided, and the void shook. Suddenly, an incomparably violent saber and sword wave surged in the sky, covering the entire space of the fighting ring. And yet Tian and Dao Hanyu's figures were drowned in it, and they could not even see their shadows. Bang, bang, bang. The crowd trembled as they watched the saber and sword shadows colliding in the sky. Endless waves of energy surged, as though they wanted to destroy the heavens and the earth. High up in the sky, in the midst of the endless waves of saber and sword energy, Tian and Dao Hanyu stood tall like two mountains. In the blink of an eye, the two of them had already exchanged more than 10 moves. Dao Hanyu frowned, and his eyes trembled violently. He had not expected Tian to be so strong. He was able to fight head-on with him and was not at a disadvantage at all. Dao Hanyu, it seems like your strength is only SOSO after all, Tian said coldly as he stared at Dao Hanyu. The more he fought, the stronger he became. Not only did his sword will merge with the heavenly Dao formation, it allowed Tian's sword Dao to break through to the next level. More importantly, after the heavenly Dao formation merged with the sword will, it could continuously create more sword wills. This allowed Tian to fight even more fiercely. How is this possible? Dao Hanyu looked at Tian and frowned, his heart filled with doubt. After fighting for so long, his physical strength had already started to weaken. On the other hand, Tian did not show any signs of weakening. Instead, he was getting stronger and stronger, and his aura was becoming more and more ferocious. You don't dare to fight anymore? Sensing Dao Hanyu's hesitation, Tian sneered coldly as he made his move. The sword intent around his body surged to the maximum as he slashed out with his sword. The shadow of his sword was like a mountain, descending from the sky towards Dao Hanyu. So strong! The crowd exclaimed in shock as they watched the scene unfold in the sky. Tian was already on the brink of death. Yet, after fighting for so long, he actually took the initiative to retaliate. This was unbelievable. Damn it! Dao Hanyu stared at the descending shadow of the sword as his eyes widened. With a low growl, he slashed out with the cold rain mystical dragon slash. The tyrannical shadow of the sword caused the entire space to tremble. Boom! However, this slash of his was like an arrow at the end of its flight. The moment it collided with the shadow of the sword, the space around it exploded. Kill! 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 Dao Hanyu retreated 1,000 meters. Before he could even react, Tian's roar reverberated through the air. It was incomparably ferocious and domineering. Boom! 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 Up in the sky, shadow after shadow of the sword could be seen. They were like dragons from the 9 heavens, swooping down from the clouds towards Dao Hanyu. Dao Hanyu furrowed his brows as his eyes trembled violently. He forcefully slashed out with the cold rain mystical dragon slash to defend against the shadow of the sword. Boom! 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 Following a series of thunderous explosions, Dao Hanyu's body continued to sink downwards. Right now, Tian had complete control of the situation. He did not give Dao Hanyu any chance to retaliate and continued to suppress him with his sword. In the air, the sword will raged like a hurricane. The entire fighting platform was filled with a chilly aura. However, this chilly aura continued to weaken. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Dao Hanyu's body fell towards the fighting platform. Every time Tian slashed out with his sword, Dao Hanyu's body would fall 1,000 meters. Everyone's eyes trembled. They did not expect Tian to be so strong. It's time for this battle to end. Right at this moment, in the air, Tian's lips twitched as he muttered. His eyes were filled with coldness and killing intent. 9 limits of the starry sky, heaven slash. In the next moment, the sword will in his body surged to the maximum as he slashed out with his sword. Chapter 3102. I admit defeat. Boom. High up in the sky above the fighting ring, a sword shadow as large as a mountain came crashing down. Its murderous aura blossomed in an instant and pressed down on Dao Hanyu. No! At that moment, Dao Hanyu felt a real threat and screamed in horror as he looked at the sword shadow coming down from the sky. But it was already too late. Kaboom! Boom, boom, boom. At the moment of life and death, Dao Hanyu barely managed to swing his saber, but was instantly drowned by the terrifying sword's shadow and exploded in the air. Bang! The next moment, the sword's shadow came crashing down, and with a dull thud, a blood-colored figure was smashed into the fighting ring, sinking deep into the ground. Kaboom! Then, the sword's shadow hit the fighting ring, and the entire fighting ring shook violently. Terrifying cracks appeared, and the fighting ring seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. The terrifying scene made everyone's eyes glaze over, and the scene fell into dead silence. After a long time, the sword wheel in the air disappeared, and the fighting ring was restored under the protection of the formation. But Dao Hanyu's figure was nowhere to be seen. On the huge fighting ring, there was only a silver-haired figure standing like a sword, as if Dao Hanyu had never existed and never stepped onto the fighting ring. At that moment, the crowd finally came to their senses and gasped, unable to put into words the shock in their hearts. In the battle between Dao Hanyu and Nie Tian, no one had expected that Dao Hanyu would end up with nothing left of his corpse. Nie Tian was just too terrifying. With the cultivation of a Stage 9 demi-saint and the realm of the ultimate sword soul, he had slain a Stage 5 demi-saint, a bloodline swordsman with the ultimate sword body. Floating high up in the sky, a faint smile appeared at the corner of Nie Tian's mouth. Without saying anything, he blurred into action and left. Dao Hanyu was a terrifying opponent, but unfortunately, Nie Tian was even more terrifying. The battle between Nie Tian and Dao Hanyu had caused a commotion, and it took a long time for the crowd to calm down. Nie Tian did not pay much attention to the battles of the top 16. He had just broken through to the realm of the ultimate sword soul, and his control over the sword was still not that good, especially the formation of Heavenly Path, which he needed to learn more. The Ghost Emperor was right. The formation of Heavenly Path and the 9 shackles of Heavenly Path restricted Nie Tian's martial body, but also stimulated it. Then, Nie Tian entered the state of cultivation. 3 days later, the battle of the top 16 ended, and the top 8 of the Heavenly Path was decided. Among the top 8, there were 3 that deserved Nie Tian's attention: Shadow Flame Ruiner, Felicitous Rain, and EMO. Even though the other 4 were all at the 3rd grade and 4th grade, none of them posed a threat to Nie Tian. Although EMO was only a rank 1 pseudo-sage, he had fused with the Baleful Frost rune, so he was not to be underestimated. Before the top 8 of the top 8 of the 8, there he was in the stage of the battle. In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed, and the battle of the top 8 had begun. At this moment, the divine envoy of Heaven's Choice appeared high up in the sky and announced the first match of the quarterfinals, Nie Tian versus EMO, in the battle of the top 8. The Heaven's Chosen one no longer needed to use their name. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly as a bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Among all his opponents, EMO was the one he did not want to meet the most. Unfortunately, he met EMO. In the sky, the Heaven's Chosen One looked at Nie Tian from afar and said with a smile, "Nie Tian, I want to see how the two of you are going to fight." She could tell that Nie Tian and EMO were friends, so she deliberately arranged for Nie Tian to be in a difficult position. At that moment, everyone turned to look at Nie Tian and EMO. Nie Tian and EMO are under the same Doomsday Messenger. They seem to have a good relationship. This battle is going to be interesting. Yeah, this battle between the two of them is not going to be easy. That EMO kid is definitely not Nie Tian's match. Why don't he just admit defeat? The crowd discussed with a strange look in their eyes. EMO, let's go up. Nie Tian smiled bitterly and turned to look at EMO. Of course, he could not ask EMO to admit defeat. After all, this was the battle of the Heaven's Chosen One. It was an important opportunity for EMO. I admit defeat. EMO looked at Nie Tian and smiled calmly. Admit defeat? Nie Tian was stunned. He did not expect EMO to say that. Nie Tian, although I don't want to admit it, EMO took a step forward and said, "Your talent and strength are indeed above mine. I am not your match." I respect your choice. Nietian thought for a while and nodded. He was confident that he could defeat EMO, but he did not expect EMO to admit defeat. The Heaven's Chosen One looked at EMO and Nietian cold from high up in the sky. Her delicate face was so gloomy that it looked like blood was going to drip out. EMO admitting defeat was not what she had expected. After all, this was the Heaven's Chosen One, and there were so many people watching. Admitting defeat required great courage. The crowd was also surprised that EMO had admitted defeat. Although many people had guessed it, hearing it from EMO's own mouth was still shocking. EMO admitting defeat made the Heaven's Chosen One very angry, but there was nothing she could do. She could only let the Heaven's Chosen One continue. 3 days later, the battles of the top 8 were over. The top 4 of the Heaven's Chosen One were Shadow Fire Ruinous Star, Siyu, Nietian, and Mo Yen. Shadow Fire Ruinous Star was the top genius of the Jueying Temple, so it was no surprise that he had entered the top 4. Siyu was a big surprise. He had been hiding his strength and had fought his way into the top 4 as a dark horse. Nietian had shocked everyone time and time again on the Heaven's Chosen One platform before finally entering the top 4. Mo Yen was from the Rakshasa Temple, and he was a one-armed martialist. It was a surprise that he had entered the top 4. Next, according to the rules of the Heaven's Chosen One competition, the Heaven's Chosen One envoy would rank the top 4 according to their previous performances, and the person who ranked first before the battle could choose his opponent. After a while, the Heaven's Chosen One envoy announced the rankings. From 1st to 4th, they were Nietian, Shadow Fire Ruinous Star, Siyu, and Mo Yen. No one was too surprised by the rankings. Although Nietian's cultivation was the weakest among the top 4, his performance on the Heaven's Chosen One platform and the Doomsday Hunt was obvious to all. It was no surprise that he was ranked first. However, when Nietian heard the rankings, he was a little surprised. He had never thought that he would be ranked first. In the previous battles, the Heaven's Chosen One envoy had chosen his opponent for him. This time, he could choose his own opponent. At that moment, the Heaven's Chosen One envoy looked at Nietian and said, Nietian, you can now choose any one of the other 3 as your opponent. At that moment, everyone's eyes were fixed on Nietian, waiting to see who Nietian would choose as his opponent. Shadow Fire Ruinous Star, Siyu, and Mo Yen were all very strong. However, if all of them were to be compared, Devil Words was the weakest. Chapter 3103. Netherworld, Demonic Dragon, Siyu. As soon as Nietian's voice rang out, everyone gasped in shock. Mo Yen was the weakest among the 3, but Nietian didn't choose him. Instead, he chose Siyu. This confused the crowd. Upon hearing Nietian's voice from afar, Yuluo's beautiful eyes flickered involuntarily as a warm feeling rose in her heart. Nietian, did you choose Felicitous Rain to be your opponent because of me? Previously, Siyu had almost killed Yuluo. Now that Nietian chose Siyu, Yuluo couldn't help but feel that Nietian wanted to avenge her. Indeed, this was one of the reasons why Nietian chose Siyu. But more importantly, Nietian felt a strong killing intent from Siyu, and he really wanted to see how strong the soul-devouring curse of the soul-devouring ghost clan was. Nietian, it seems like you think I'm a pushover. At this moment, Siyu appeared on the fighting stage. His eyes were as cold as a snake's as he stared at Nietian. You will soon find out that you made the wrong choice. Is that so? Nietian laughed. His silhouette flickered as he stepped onto the fighting stage. Shadow Flame Ruinous Star stared at Nietian on the fighting stage. His eyes were filled with a strong, killing intent. He had expected that Nietian wouldn't choose him. At this moment, he hoped that Nietian would be able to defeat Siyu instead of dying in Siyu's hands. He wanted to kill Nietian with his own hands. The battle intent on the fighting stage was intense. Tianling stood in the air. Sword intent surged from his body, making him look like a gigantic sword. On the other hand, Siyu's face was cold. His small eyes flickered with a cold light. His body was covered in a rain of blood. Die! In the next moment, Siyu didn't hesitate. He roared and released his killing intent. 9 blood curtains appeared around him. They were red and violent, as if they wanted to devour the heavens and earth. Sword cutting 8 desolation. Nietion knew how terrifying the blood rain was. His expression darkened as he unleashed the starlight heaven slash. His battle intent surged, and a terrifying sword image rushed towards the 9 blood rain curtains. Bang! Bang! The shadow of the sword was like a dragon, incomparably violent. It directly broke through the 9 curtains of blood rain and pressed down on felicitous rain. But at this moment, Shigur's figure suddenly swayed and vanished into thin air. Nietion frowned. He immediately sensed that something was wrong, and his expression changed. Nietion, can you break the Yellow Springs blood rain? In the next instant, Yu's sinister voice reverberated through the air, following which the Yellow Springs blood rain barrier appeared, enveloping the entire battle platform. The fighting ring, which was tens of thousands of meters wide, was filled with blood rain, which made people feel extremely oppressed. It's that blood-colored barrier again. When everyone saw this scene, their eyes violently trembled and they cried out in horror. Previously, Shigur had already used the Yellow Springs blood rain and almost killed Yulua. If it wasn't for Yulua forcefully activating the Myriad Universe Saint Seal, she most likely would have died in the hands of Shigur. Oh no! Yulua's beautiful eyes trembled and her heart sank. She had personally experienced the Yellow Springs blood rain and knew how terrifying this barrier was. She was very worried that Nietion wouldn't be able to break the blood rain barrier. You want to trap me with a small barrier? What a joke. At this moment, Nietion's incomparably arrogant voice resounded on the fighting ring. Arrogant. Shigur's voice resounded. Immediately after, within the Yellow Springs blood rain barrier, a sky full of blood rain appeared and turned into numerous sharp blades, enveloping towards Nietion. Nietion felt the violent aura of the blood rain in the space. It was like maggots attached to his body and wanted to devour the power of his bloodline. Boom! At this moment, his body shook and a towering sword momentum was released. Immediately, the endless blood rain was pushed back by him. How is this possible? The sudden scene caused Shigur to cry out in surprise. Obviously, he was extremely shocked. The Yellow Springs blood rain barrier had a strong suppressive force on cultivators. Even Yulua, who cultivated the Myriad Universe devouring art, was suppressed. Why was Nietion not suppressed at all? 9 limits of starry sky, earth split. At this moment, Nietion spoke coldly and slashed out with his sword. The sword's shadow was like a mountain, releasing a terrifying force. Wah! In just an instant, the huge Yellow Springs blood rain barrier shook and was directly broken. Bang! Then, with a muffled sound, a figure was sent flying, drawing a bloody trail in the air. Shigur. When the crowd saw the figure's face clearly, their eyes couldn't help but tremble as they shouted the person's name. At this moment, the person who was sent flying was Shigur. In the next moment, the crowd's gaze immediately shifted to Nietion. They were incomparably shocked. Just now, Nietion was trapped in the Yellow Springs blood rain barrier by Shigur, but he was actually able to break the barrier and seriously injure Shigur. It was really unbelievable. Idiot! How can the Yellow Springs blood rain barrier suppress the power of the stars? Heaven's chosen one, who was high up in the sky, frowned and said with a cold heart. In addition to the terrifying, devouring force of the blood rain, the most terrifying thing about Shigur's Yellow Springs blood rain barrier was that it could suppress a cultivator's strength. However, Nietion was a person who possessed the Star Essence Stone. Ordinary barriers couldn't suppress the power of the stars at all. What kind of power do you have in your body? How can you ignore the suppression of the Yellow Springs blood rain? On the fighting ring, Shigur steadied his body, his eyes trembling as he asked in surprise. For a dead man, is there any need to know the answer? Nietion laughed and took a step forward, releasing his sword intent crazily. He could ignore the suppression of the Yellow Springs blood rain because of the Star Essence Stone and the Heavenly Path formation. At this moment, his martial body and the Heavenly Path formation had fused together. His blood vessels were filled with the power of the heavenly path, which had great resistance against the barrier. Therefore, Shigur's Yellow Springs blood rain barrier posed no threat to Nyetian. Nyetian, do you think I only have a Yellow Springs blood rain? Shigur's eyes darkened. Then he calmed down and said coldly, You can't imagine what I'm capable of. Today you must die. As his cold voice fell, Shigur raised his arm, and a blood-red vortex appeared on his palm. He threw it out, and it exploded in the air. Roar! Then, a deep roar came from the blood-red vortex. A giant black beast appeared, roaring crazily and releasing a violent aura. Nyetian looked at the giant black beast, and his eyes narrowed. He didn't expect Shigur to have such a strange skill. The giant black beast was more than 1,000 meters long, like a giant crocodile. Its body was covered with horny scales that looked extremely hard, like an upside-down sword. On the top of the giant beast's head, there was a huge black horn that emitted a violent aura. Yellow Springs demonic dragon. Tear him apart. At this moment, Shigur's mouth twitched, and he said coldly, Chapter 3104. Bloody Slaughter. Dying. On the fighting ring. Sure you let out a low roar. The netherworld demonic dragon swung its forearms, and a violent aura filled the air. Its face was covered in scales and looked extremely ferocious. Boom! The giant claw descended with terrifying strength that seemed to be able to tear the void apart. The oppressive force made the void rumble. Nyetian frowned and slashed with his sword while retreating at the same time. Bang! In the air, the netherworld demonic dragon's giant claw descended and shattered Nyetian's sword shadow. The netherworld demonic dragon's body was extremely terrifying, and its strength was terrifying. It forcefully shattered the sword shadow. Nyetian retreated 1,000 meters. He narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice, You beast, your skin is really thick. Boom! Before he finished his sentence, he slashed with his sword. A 10,000-meter-long sword shadow appeared in the air and slashed at the netherworld demonic dragon. Roar! The demonic dragon was not afraid. It roared and rolled its huge body in the air in extremely fast speed. The giant horn on its head charged at Yifutian. Boom! The giant horn was extremely hard. It collided with the sword shadow and shattered it. Nyetian frowned. He did not expect the netherworld demonic dragon to be so powerful. Boom! In the next moment, the Yellow Springs demonic dragon charged at Nyetian and swung its huge claws at him. 9 limits of starry sky, heavenly slash. Nyetian frowned. The sword intent in his body surged to the extreme, and he slashed with his sword. The sword shadow was like a wild dragon that was about to drown the netherworld demonic dragon. Bang! However, when the sword shadow landed on the netherworld demonic dragon's body, it suddenly paused and then shattered. Nyetian used the recoil force to dodge the netherworld demonic dragon's sharp claws. This big guy's body is too strong. I can't penetrate it at all. Nyetian stabilized himself in the air and said with a frown. The netherworld demonic dragon's scales were extremely hard. Its body was as tough as a heaven-ranked devourer. His sword shadows bombarded the netherworld demonic dragon, but they were completely ineffective. Nyetian, is this all you've got? And at this moment, Shigur's voice rang out. It was incomparably cold as he said, Why don't you let me find a few more opponents for you? Roar! Roar! As soon as he finished speaking, 2 deep roars came from the blood-color vortex. Then, 2 more Yellow Springs demonic dragons appeared. Oh no! Nyetian couldn't help but frown and cry out in his heart. One netherworld demonic dragon was already difficult enough to deal with. Now that 2 more had appeared, he was undoubtedly in a difficult situation. 3 netherworld demonic dragons. Can you stop them? Shiryu's eyes were cold as he said viciously, Roar! At this moment, the 3 netherworld demonic dragons let out deep roars at the same time. A layer of blood-colored runes appeared on their terrifying bodies, causing their auras to become even more violent. Boom! 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 In the next moment, the 3 netherworld demonic dragons moved at the same time. They charged madly at Nyetian from 3 different directions. They were extremely fast and ruthless. Nyation narrowed his eyes. The astral soul wings appeared on his back, and he immediately retreated. Even if his martial physique was strong, it was impossible for him to face the netherworld demonic dragons head-on. Do you think you can escape? Shiryu's eyes were fixed on Nyation. His eyes were filled with murderous intent as he sneered. Nyation's speed was fast, but the netherworld demonic dragons were even faster. In the blink of an eye, the three demonic dragons were only a few hundred meters away from Nyation. At this moment, Nyation's expression changed slightly when he sensed the terrifying aura of the netherworld demonic dragons. In the next moment, he activated the heavenly water pole yuan armor and the astral soul shield. At the same time, he nimbly dodged the attacks with strange footwork and dashed toward one of the netherworld demonic dragons. What's Nyation doing? The scene in the fighting ring caused everyone to exclaim in shock and confusion. Nyation did not retreat. Instead, he dashed toward the netherworld demonic dragons. Isn't he courting death? The netherworld demonic dragons were extremely strong. If their claws hit Nyation head-on, he would be severely injured even if he survived. You're courting death. Shiryu's eyes darkened when he saw Nyation dashing toward him. Roar! The three netherworld demonic dragons roared in unison. The blood-colored runes on their bodies flickered and released blood-colored ripples. Seeing this, Nyation's eyes narrowed, and the corners of his mouth curled into a strange smile. He noticed that the blood-colored runes on the netherworld demonic dragon's bodies were gathered in a depression on the dragon's abdomen. This depression was the netherworld demonic dragon's weakness. Bang, bang, bang. Nyation activated the astral soul shield to block the attacks from the blood-colored runes in the air. He moved swiftly toward one of the netherworld demonic dragons. Huh? Seeing this scene, Shigeru suddenly reacted, and his eyes couldn't help but darken. He did not expect Nyation to find the netherworld demonic dragon's weakness so quickly. Boom! At that moment, Nyation arrived in front of one of the Yellow Springs demonic dragons. A hint of a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth as he thrust the star heavenly slash forward. A sword shadow with extreme sharpness slashed towards the Yellow Springs demonic dragon's abdomen. Boom! In the next moment, the sword shadow fell. A muffled sound came from the sky. The netherworld demonic dragon was pierced through by the huge sword shadow. In an instant, the sky was drenched in blood. It was an extremely tragic scene. Roar! Roar! At the same time, the other two demonic dragons roared and charged toward Nyation. Their eyes were extremely ferocious like a bloody abyss. They were less than 1,000 meters away from Nyation. At such a close distance, there was no way he could dodge. Bang! At this critical moment, Nyation moved his body slightly to the side to avoid the netherworld demonic dragon's frontal attack. However, he was affected by the powerful impact and was sent flying. In midair, Nyation flapped his wings and stabilized himself. His body was drenched in blood. There was a bone-deep wound on his chest. Blood kept gushing out. The netherworld demonic dragon was too powerful. If Nyation had been hit directly, he would have been a corpse. But now he was also heavily injured. Ha! Nyation, you're dead meat. Shiryu laughed maniacally when he saw Nyation was injured. His eyes were vicious and excited as if he could already see the scene of Nyation being killed by the netherworld demonic dragon. Is that so? At this moment, the corner of Nyation's mouth twitched. Then he moved. In midair, sword intent burst out from his body. Shiryu looked at Nyation and couldn't help but exclaim. He didn't expect that Nyation would dare to take the initiative to attack when he was heavily injured. Sacred heaven-defying sword. Heavenly sword reverses the sun. In midair, Nyation's figure flashed like a bolt of lightning. As his deep voice echoed out, his flesh aura surged and his sword intent reached its limit. Roar! Roar! The two netherworld demonic dragons seemed to feel threatened. They roared and charged toward Nyation. Boom! Boom! In the next instant, Nyation lashed out with his sword. A 10,000-meter-long, blood-colored sword shadow appeared in the air. It split into two and struck at the fatal spots of the two netherworld demonic dragons. Chapter 3105. Kill you with one strike high up in the sky. Nietion's figure appeared under the cover of a blood-red light. His body seemed to be bathed in blood, and his eyes were bloodshot, as if he was the god of death who had just walked out of hell. He killed two netherworld demonic dragons with one strike. How is this possible? Everyone was taken aback by the scene in the fighting ring. They looked at Nietion with fear in their eyes. Just now, Nietion was forced to retreat by one netherworld demonic dragon, but after being injured, he killed two netherworld demonic dragons with one strike. The difference in strength was too big. Could it be that Nietion had been hiding his strength from the beginning? How can your strike be so powerful? On the fighting ring, Shiryu's eyes trembled as he shouted in shock. Unconcealable fear appeared on his face. Your netherworld demonic dragons are gone. What else do you have? Nietion ignored him. Sword essence surged from his body like a sharp blade, and his eyes were filled with killing intent. The reason why Nietion was able to kill the two demonic dragons with a single strike just now was because he had used his most powerful sword move, Heavenly Sword Reverses Sunday. Moreover, he had discovered that the power of the Heavenly Tao formation had increased significantly under the stimulation of his blood chi. This had also allowed his sword intent to rise abruptly. Another important reason was that Nietion had discovered the weakness of the netherworld demonic dragon. If he had not hit the vital part of the netherworld demonic dragon, he might not have been able to kill it with one strike. Nietion, your strength has exceeded my expectations, but you can't win this battle. Shiryu's eyes darkened, and he became much calmer. His whole body was emitting a gloomy aura. Is that so? Nietion laughed. His figure moved like lightning, and in an instant, he slashed out with his sword. The mountain-like sword shadow shrouded Shiryu. Shiryu's eyes narrowed, and he formed a seal with his hands. Boom! Immediately, the blood-red vortex in the air sensed it and let out a low rumble in the air. Then, a huge tombstone appeared and let out a rumbling sound in the air. Bang! In the void, the tombstone that was like a mountain fell, directly bombarding the huge sword shadow. In an instant, the sword shadow collapsed, and a violent sword will surged into space, extremely sharp. Feeling the immense pressure, Nietion could not help but frown. His expression changed as he retreated 1,000 meters away. Nietion, this Yellow Springs tombstone was erected for you. Prepare to die. Up in the sky, Felicitous Rain let out a fierce roar, his eyes filled with intense killing intent. Do you think a tombstone can kill me? Nietion replied with a smile. His figure suddenly moved, and the sword will all over his body exploded to the extreme. Inside his body, the color of blood surged. The heavenly path formation fused with the sword will, and the power of the sword will was stimulated to the extreme. Boundless sword intent aura, sharp as a blade, made Nietion look like a violent giant sword, standing tall in the sky, as if it could kill everything. At this time, Nietion's eyes were burning with excitement. He had a new understanding of the heavenly path formation. Yellow Spring Tombstone, Yellow Spring Blood Burial. At this time, Shiryu roared, and the huge Yellow Spring Tombstone came crashing down. In the void, streams of blood spring were released, and like a raging wave, they enveloped Nietion. Boom! 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 Then, in the sky, the streams of blood spring condensed into a huge blood-red hand, releasing an extremely bloody aura, and spread towards Nietion. This person is so scary. Seeing this scene, the crowd could not help but tremble violently, and they exclaimed. Shiryu's strength was beyond everyone's expectations, evil and powerful. The aura released by the huge blood-red hands was really like the Yellow Spring, giving people a great pressure. If a warrior below the half-saint realm was under the pressure of a Yellow Spring tombstone, they would directly explode and die. At this time, the crowd could not help but worry for Nietion. Although Nye Tion's combat ability was strong, he was still only a rank 9 demi-saint. Could he withstand such violent bloodspring? Oomph. Is this all you've got? In the sky above the battle platform, Nye Tion looked at the huge blood-red hands that were surging towards him like a raging wave, but he smiled coldly. There was no fear in his eyes, but deep contempt and a strong desire to fight. The next moment, his figure moved, and the sword wool all over his body was sharp and murderous. Every sword wool aura was as sharp as a blade, as if it could destroy everything. 8 Desolation Sword. In the air, Nye Tion's mouth twitched, and he murmured. Starry Sky Slash was unleashed, and a 10,000-meter-long sword shadow appeared in the void, its aura incomparably majestic, and the sword waves shot into the sky. Boom! Bam, bam, bam. The sword shadow was like a giant beast, rushing into the sky full of blood-red hands. The blood spring directly exploded in the sky, and the endless smell of blood spread in all directions, filling the whole fighting ring. The battle platform that was tens of thousands of meters in circumference had turned into a sea of blood, and it looked extremely terrifying and frightening. How is this possible? Shigur's eyes trembled as he watched the blood spring shatter, and he could not help but cry out in shock. He did not expect that Nye Tion's strength had reached such a level that he could even break the Yellow Springs blood burial unleashed by the Yellow Springs tombstone. The Yellow Springs tombstone, is it? Break. It was at this moment that Nye Tion, who was standing on the sea of blood, had a murderous look in his eyes. With a low roar, he directly swung his sword, and the sword shadow that was as violent as a dragon blasted towards the Yellow Springs tombstone. No! Shigur's eyes trembled, and he immediately sensed that something was wrong. But it was all too late. Boom! Bam, bam, bam. The moment the sword shadow landed, there was a loud bang in the air, and the huge Yellow Springs tombstone that was as huge as a mountain collapsed. And in the next instant, the sea of blood on the battle platform disappeared. In the air, Nye Tion's figure stood coldly, like a sword god descending to the world. But at this moment, the corner of his mouth twitched, and without any hesitation, his figure instantly moved, and he directly rushed toward Shigur. Shigur, your methods are strange, but your true strength is definitely not this strong. I can kill you with one sword. In the void, Nye Tion's voice sounded, and it was as cold as killing, like a death knell, ringing in Shigur's ears. When Shigur used the Yellow Springs tombstone just now, he could already tell that Shigur's strength was only at the 3rd stage pseudo-sage. The realm of a 3rd stage pseudo-sage was much higher than Nye Tion, but in front of Nye Tion, it was completely insufficient. Nye Tion, you... In an instant, Shigur felt the aura of death approaching, and his pair of beady eyes trembled in horror, and he screamed in horror. But he did not have the chance to finish his sentence, and his voice was abruptly cut off by the sword shadow. Boom! The sword shadow landed, and the entire battle platform shook, as though it was about to collapse. Shigur's figure was engulfed by the sword shadow, and not even his bones were left. Chapter 3106. One soul with 2 bodies. After a long while, the crowd came to their senses. Their eyes were still trembling as they looked at Nye Tion. No one had expected Nye Tion to be so powerful that he could kill Shiryu with a single stroke of his sword. Although Shiryu's skills were strange, his own strength did not seem to be very strong. This made the crowd confused. Above the fighting ring, after killing Shiryu, Nye Tion did not look relaxed. His eyes were fixed on the blood-red vortex in the air. He was surprised that the blood-red vortex did not disappear after Shiryu's death. It seemed that the blood-red vortex was being controlled by an unknown force. Nye Tion frowned and tried to get closer to the blood-red vortex. He immediately felt a strong smell of blood. As he got closer, he found that the smell of blood did not disappear. Instead, it became stronger. Could it be? Nye Tion was even more confused. At this moment, the Ghost Emperor's surprised voice was heard. After a moment of hesitation, he said, "One soul with 2 bodies. One soul with 2 bodies?" Hearing the Ghost Emperor's words, Yet Tion's eyes narrowed and his expression changed. He did not understand what the Ghost Emperor meant. Tion. Right at this moment, a gloomy and low voice suddenly sounded out from within the blood-red vortex, and it resounded through space and revealed traces of coldness that seemed like slaughter. Eh! The sudden voice made Tion's eyes narrow, and he exclaimed in surprise. He had not expected a voice to come from the blood-red vortex. The voice was different from Shiryu's, but it seemed to have the same aura. It was very strange. The crowd outside the fighting ring was also shocked by the strange scene on the fighting ring. Their faces were filled with fear. What's that voice? Why is it so strange? Shiryu is clearly dead. Could it be that there is someone else in the blood-red vortex? Could it be that Shiryu is still alive and has been hiding in the blood-red vortex? The crowd discussed among themselves. The fear in their eyes became more and more intense. This scene was so strange that no one had expected it to happen. Looking at the blood-colored vortex, Tion calmed down and asked with a grim look in his eyes, "Who are you?" "Tion, I will remember you. We will meet again." The deep voice came from the blood-colored vortex again. It did not answer Tion. Instead, it left behind a threat and then disappeared. Tion frowned, a confused expression on his face. Who was the person in the blood-colored vortex? Tion, I'm afraid you've provoked a powerful person. At that moment, the Ghost Monarch's voice resounded. I never thought that the soul of this fellow from the Soul Eater tribe would be this powerful. Ghost Emperor, what do you mean by one soul and two bodies? Tion frowned and could not help but ask. One soul, two bodies is a forbidden technique of the Soul Devourer Ghost Clan. The Ghost Monarch explained. The Soul Devourer tribe's bloodline power is the Soul Devourer Ghost Curse, which can seize souls. The one soul and two bodies technique is the most suitable evil technique for the Soul Devourer Ghost Curse. When the Soul Devourer Ghost Curse reaches a certain level, those who cultivate one soul and two bodies can split their souls and occupy two martial bodies at the same time. This... Tion frowned, and his face stiffened when he heard the Ghost Monarch's words. He had already understood. The so-called one soul and two bodies technique meant that the same soul would possess two martial bodies. Tion, the martialist you just killed was a person who cultivated the one soul and two bodies technique. See, he was only one of his soul bodies. The person hiding behind the blood-colored vortex is the other soul body. The Ghost Monarch said in a deep voice. Ghost Monarch, will killing this soul body affect the other soul body? Tion frowned and could not help but ask. For a cultivator with one soul and two bodies, when one soul body is killed, the Soul Devourer Ghost Curse will return to the other soul body. Even the bloodline power that the Soul Devourer Ghost Curse absorbed will return. The Ghost Monarch replied to Tion, this way, not only will the other soul body not be harmed, but the other soul body will also become stronger after absorbing the Soul Devourer Ghost Curse. Therefore, if you see Cuyu's other soul body, its strength will definitely be much stronger than Cuyu. Tion's eyes narrowed slightly as his lips curled into a bitter smile. He had not expected Cuyu to be a cultivator with one soul and two bodies. It seemed like this guy was a genius of the Soul Devourer tribe. No wonder Cuyu dared to kill Yuluo in front of the three Rakshasa kings. He was not afraid of dying here. A cultivator with one soul and two bodies was indeed very rare. Tion remembered Cuyu's name in his heart. Although Cuyu had only lost one soul body, he had still lost this battle. Tion had successfully advanced to the next round. What awaited him next was the final battle. Next up was the second battle of the top four. Shadowfire Ruinous Star versus Demon Yin. Tion, you did not disappoint me. You made it to the end. Shadowfire Ruinous Star moved, but he did not immediately step onto the stage. Instead, he came to Tion's side and stared at Tion with a pair of gloomy eyes. Among all the chosen ones, the one who can kill you is me. Only I can. Tion looked at Shadowfire Ruinous Star and said with a faint smile, Shadowfire Ruinous Star, defeat your opponent first. Then you can decide if you can kill me or not. My opponent? Shadow Fire Ruinous Star sneered. He then turned to look at Demon Yin, who was already standing on the stage. Without any hesitation, he shouted, "This piece of trash! I only need one move to kill him." Everyone's expressions darkened when they heard Shadow Fire Ruinous Star's words. Shadow Fire Ruinous Star is too arrogant. Demon Yin is a member of Rakshasa Temple. Moreover, his strength has already reached the Tier 4 Pseudo-Saint standard. Even if he isn't a match for Shadow Fire Ruinous Star, there's no way he can be killed in one move. That's right. Although Demon Yan's performance in the previous battles wasn't eye-catching, he was still very powerful. It won't be easy for Shadow Fire Ruinous Star to defeat him. I don't think so. Shadow Fire Ruinous Star's strength is already at the Tier 6 Pseudo-Saint standard. He definitely has the strength to kill Demon Yin in one move. Everyone was talking excitedly. Shadow Fire Ruinous Star, you are too arrogant. At this time, Mo Yan's loud voice resounded in the fighting ring. You will soon pay the price for your arrogance. Shadow Fire Ruinous Star had called Demon Yin trash in front of so many people and wanted to kill him in one move. How could he not be angry? Boom! The instant Demon Yan's voice fell, he took a step forward. Immediately, a terrifying power erupted from his severed arm. Chapter 3107. In the fighting ring, Mo Yan's severed arm suddenly released an extremely violent force. What a powerful force! Sensing this force, everyone's eyes couldn't help but tremble as they exclaimed, "Boom! Boom! Boom!" Then, Mo Yan's severed arm began to tremble and release a powerful force that formed visible energy ripples in the air. It was extremely terrifying. Tian couldn't help but frown when he felt this power. He said in a deep voice, "Ward." What Mo Yin had unleashed at that moment was actually a very powerful spirit power. His severed arm is indeed strange. It's a powerful seal. Tian said in a deep voice as he realized what was going on. He had sensed a strange aura from Mo Yan's severed arm earlier, but he did not expect it to be a severed arm. It's indeed a seal. At the same time, the Ghost Emperor said, "This guy is very strong-willed to seal his severed arm and condense his strength. This method is almost self-mutilation. However, the moment the seal on his severed arm is undone, his strength will erupt instantly, and he will break through to a new realm. I speculate that when the seal on his severed arm is completely undone, his strength will directly increase by 2 or even 3 levels." Tian's eyes widened upon hearing the Ghost Emperor's words. Boom! The moment the Ghost Emperor's voice fell, Mo Yan's entire body released a powerful aura. It was boundlessly majestic, and everyone present could clearly feel an extremely terrifying aura. Then, Mo Yan's severed arm grew out in an instant. His aura began to skyrocket in an instant. Level 1, Level 2, Level 3. Under the gaze of countless people, Mo Yan's strength skyrocketed by 3 levels in an instant, from a level 4 pseudo-sacred to a level 7 pseudo-sacred. The Ghost Emperor was right. Mo Yan was using self-mutilation to seal his severed arm and condense his strength. When the seal was broken, he would seek a breakthrough. How is this possible? The crowd was extremely shocked when they saw the scene on the fighting ring. The strength of a pseudo-saint cultivator soared by 3 ranks in an instant. If not for the fact that he had witnessed it with his own eyes, he would not have believed it. Then, the crowd came to their senses and began to exclaim, "Oh my God! Mo Yan's strength has actually risen to the 7th stage pseudo-saint realm. How terrifying! Demon Word's cultivation is already higher than Shadow Flame, Ruinous Stars. It looks like it's hard to say who will emerge victorious in this battle. This demonic words is indeed powerful. He has been hiding his strength all this time. It turns out that he is the strongest of all the heaven's chosen ones." Everyone's eyes trembled as they were shocked by Mo Yan's strength. The eyes of everyone from the 10 Directions Rakshasa Palace were blazing with excitement. Mo Yan's increase in strength was terrifying, even exceeding the expectations of Huangchu, Eli, and the others. On the other side, The people from Juying Palace looked serious. They were obviously worried about Shadowfire Ruinous Star. The battle between Mo Yin and Shadowflame Army Breaker was not just a battle between the two of them, nor was it a battle between Heaven's Choice. On a certain level, it was also a clash between the two superpowers, Ten Directions Rakshasa Temple and Juying Temple. The two of them represented the faces of the two temples. However, the Lord of Juying Temple, Ing Qinyu, looked very calm. The corners of his mouth curled into a faint smile as he thought to himself, "It's impossible to fight against the army breaker with such strength." Ing Qinyu knew very well how strong Shadowflame Ruinous Star was. A mere Mo Yin was no match for the army breaker. Shadowflame Ruinous Star, do you still dare to say that you could defeat me in one move? At this moment, Mo Yin stepped forward on the battle platform. His aura was imposing as he spoke loudly. His eyes were insufferably arrogant. Everyone's eyes trembled as they immediately looked at Shadowflame Ruinous Star. When Shadowflame Ruinous Star had said that he could kill Mo Yin in one move, he had some strength. But now that Mo Yin's strength had reached the 7th stage pseudo-saint realm, if Shadowflame Ruinous Star still said that, he would be too arrogant. Mo Yin, your strength has indeed exceeded my expectations. Shadowflame Ruinous Star looked at Mo Yin and smiled faintly. But I will still only need one move to kill you. His voice was indifferent, but it was filled with extreme arrogance. Shadowflame Ruinous Star, you are too arrogant. Mo Yin was thoroughly enraged after being looked down upon once again. He let out a low roar that was incomparably violent. "Oomph." Shadowflame Ruinous Star smiled faintly. He then moved, hovering above the battle platform. His aura was as vast as the mountains and as vast as the seas. He looked down at Mo Yin and said in a cold tone, "Mo Yin, it is not that I am too arrogant, but you are too weak." "Shut up." Mo Yin was thoroughly enraged. He let out a roar and his silhouette moved. He slapped out with his palm as tens of thousands of demonic runes appeared in the void, transforming into ghostly shadows that instantly enveloped the entire battle platform. At this moment, the crowd heard incomparably mournful wails, as if countless ghosts were suffering from extreme torture within the endless ghostly shadows. So strong, as expected of a 7th stage pseudo-saint expert. The eyes of the crowd trembled in shock. Mo Yin was able to erupt with such terrifying strength in an instant, causing the crowd to be extremely shocked. Shadowflame Ruinous Star felt the pressure pressing down on him, but he still laughed and said, "Mo Yin, is that all you have?" His voice wasn't loud, but when it landed in Mo Yin's ears, it was like a sharp blade, extremely piercing. Courting death, Mo Yin roared like a crazed, demonic beast. Suddenly, the ghostly shadows in the void became abnormally violent, like a raging tsunami, pressing down on Shadowflame Ruinous Star. Army Destroyer Magic Armor, activate. At this moment, Shadowflame Ruinous Star roared in a low voice. His body trembled as a heaven-defying aura surged up, like a volcano that had suddenly erupted. Violent energy instantly enveloped his entire body, condensing into an incomparably huge giant. Army Destroyer Magic Armor. Shadowflame Ruinous Star didn't give Mo Yin any chance to retaliate and directly used his strongest trump card. Die. In the next instant, Shadowflame Ruiner's eyes flashed with a cold light, and he let out a bestial roar. His aura surged, and he punched out with his Army Destroyer Magic Armor, sending a violent wave of energy towards the endless stream of ghosts. Boom, 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 boom. Following which, the huge fist landed, and a destructive power erupted. The ghostly shadows were like leaves in a storm, collapsing one after another. Don't kill me. At this moment, Mo Yin felt the real aura of death approaching. His eyes couldn't help but tremble, and his heart was filled with extreme fear. Even in his dreams, he didn't expect Shadowflame Ruinous Star's strength to be this strong. He wanted to resist, he didn't want to die, but at this moment, it was all too late. Boom! In the next moment, the huge fist landed with a loud bang, directly engulfing Mo Yan's body, and then heavily smashed into the fighting ring. The whole fighting ring shook violently, and then a huge crater with a radius of 1,000 meters appeared, with huge cracks all around. Chapter 3108. A pinnacle battle outside the platform. Everyone was shocked by the scene before them. Their eyes trembled, and they could not react for a long time. Who would have thought that Shadowfire Ruinous Star's strength had reached such a level? One punch, just one punch, and he had killed Mo Yan. Shadowfire Ruinous Star's punch had nearly destroyed the entire platform. One could imagine how powerful it was. Out of all the battles in the Heaven's Choice contest, this was the first time the platform had suffered the most damage. Even with the protection of the array, it took a long time for the platform to recover. Is this the strength of a genius from the Rakshasa Temple? At this time, Shadowfire Ruinous Star spoke up without any hesitation. A piece of trash. His voice was very loud, clearly meant for the people from the Rakshasa Temple to hear. The eyes of the three Rakshasa kings burned with rage. Every word from Shadowfire Ruinous Star was like a slap to their faces. They had never thought that Shadowfire Ruinous Star's strength would reach such a level. One had to know that Mo Yan was a 7th-level pseudo-sage, yet he had been killed by Shadowfire Ruinous Star with one punch. Didn't that mean that Shadowfire Ruinous Star's current strength was close to a 9th-level pseudo-sage? Outside the platform, yet Tian stared at Shadowfire Ruinous Star, unable to conceal his shock. He had never thought that Shadowfire Ruinous Star would be so strong. Back in the Doomsday Forest, Shadowfire Ruinous Star had clearly not been this strong. But now, it seemed like he had suddenly become stronger. Shadowfire Ruinous Star's domineering killing of Mo Yan had thoroughly shocked everyone. However, he didn't leave the fighting ring. Instead, he stared at Nie Tian, who was outside the fighting ring, with a vicious and cold glint in his eyes. He shouted, "Nie Tian, there are only 2 of us left. Let's fight." Nie Tian frowned, staring at Shadowfire Ruinous Star. Originally, after the Battle of the Top 4, they could rest for 3 days to allow the Chosen Ones to recover their strength and reach their peak. But Shadowfire Ruinous Star had directly provoked Nie Tian and wanted to fight. Shadowflame Ruinous Star's provocation stunned everyone, and they immediately started discussing it. Shadowflame Ruinous Star is too strong. If Nie Tian accepts the challenge now, he'll just be throwing his life away. So what if Nie Tian doesn't accept the challenge now? Could it be that he'll be a match for Shadowflame Army Breaker in 3 days? Yeah, Nie Tian is really in danger this time. No matter how talented he is only a stage 9 demi-saint. There is no way he can fight Shadowflame Ruinous Star. As they spoke, they looked at Nie Tian with pity and even pity in their eyes. In their eyes, Nie Tian was already a corpse. Nie Tian, are you afraid? At this moment, Shadowflame Ruiner once again provoked Nie Tian when he saw that Nie Tian wasn't replying. Afraid? Nie Tian frowned and laughed. I'm afraid that you will die a horrible death. As he spoke, he moved and stepped onto the platform. Shadowflame Ruinous Star had dug out Rui Qianyu's 9-colored pupils. This incident was like a poisonous thorn that made Nie Tian very upset. Only by killing Shadowflame Ruinous Star would he be able to rest easy. Seeing Nie Tian stepping onto the fighting ring, everyone's eyes trembled with astonishment. Nie Tian is really going on stage. Is he tired of living? It's not wise to go on stage at this time. It's better to fight in 3 days. Nie Tian is already a stage 9 demi-saint. Who knows? He might be able to break through in 3 days. The crowd was talking and shaking their heads. They all thought that Nie Tian was too impulsive and should not have gone on stage at this time. If he fought in 3 days, he would at least be able to live for another 3 days. High up in the sky, the Saint Envoy of Heaven's Choice frowned and wanted to say something, but he held back. Since both Shadowflame Ruinous Star and Nie Tian wanted to fight immediately, of course it was fine. On the platform, Shadowflame Ruinous Star looked at Nie Tian and smiled cold. His eyes filled with murderous intent, Nietion. I thought you were smart. I didn't expect you to be such an idiot. Shadow Flame Ruinous Star, have you forgotten? How did you die in my hands in the Doomsday Jungle? This time, I will let you die a horrible death. Nie Tianling replied with a smile. Starlight Heaven Slash appeared in his hand, and his entire body surged with sword will. Courting death, Shadow Flame Ruinous Star was enraged when he heard Nie Tian's words. He roared and activated his army destroyer magic armor again. A terrifying aura spread out and filled the entire platform. The army destroyer magic armor is indeed powerful. Nie Tian frowned as he felt the aura of the army destroyer magic armor. The army destroyer magic armor was over 10,000 meters long and was incomparably terrifying. Even the platform seemed tiny in comparison. Die for me. At this moment, Shadow Flame Ruinous Star roared and punched out in the direction of Nie Tian. Be's easy. The strength of the army destroyer magic armor was simply too strong. A single punch from it caused the entire space to tremble. If this punch landed on Nie Tian, even if he didn't die, he would be heavily injured. Nie Tian narrowed his eyes, and astral soul wings appeared on his back. At the same time, he slashed out with his sword, causing sword shadows to howl as they pressed forward. You want to contend against my army destroyer magic armor with such strength? Ridiculous. Shadow Flame Ruinous Star laughed coldly as he shattered the sword shadows with a single punch. His terrifying fist was akin to a mountain as it smashed towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian's silhouette flickered agilely as he evaded the attack of the army destroyer magic armor. Trying to escape? Shadow Flame Ruinous Star laughed coldly as his fist missed. The gigantic army destroyer magic armor stomped heavily on the ground, causing the entire platform to tremble as though it was about to collapse. In the next instant, the army destroyer magic armor soared into the skies, aiming for Nie Tian. Nie Tian stood in the air, feeling the violent pressure bearing down on him. His eyes narrowed. Die! At this moment, Shadow Flame Ruinous Star roared like thunder as he punched out with his fist. Instantly, tens of thousands of fist shadows appeared in the air, covering the entire space as they rushed towards Nie Tian. Such a large-scale attack, there was no way for Nie Tian to evade. He could only face it head-on. Saint Heaven Defying Sword. Sky Sword reverses the sun. Nie Tian frowned. His eyes narrowed as the sword intent in his body surged to the extreme. At the same time, the blood and chi in his body surged, fusing into the heavenly Tao formation, causing his sword intent to erupt with the strongest power. Boom! High up in the air, a blood-colored sword shadow appeared, blasting towards the countless black fist shadows. Boom! Boom, boom, boom. In the next instant, the two extremely powerful forces collided together. Terrifying rumbling sounds rang out in the air as the terrifying power instantly spread out, wreaking havoc in the air as though it wanted to tear the heavens and earth apart. The gazes of the crowd trembled. The shock in their hearts was indescribable. The terror of this battle had far exceeded their expectations. It seemed as though the battle wasn't as one-sided as they had imagined. Although Nie Tian was at a disadvantage, he similarly displayed shocking combat prowess. Chapter 3109. Extremely brutal. Everyone watched the battle on the fighting platform with trembling eyes. They were extremely shocked. After a long while, the waves in the sky dissipated and Nie Tian appeared. At this moment, Nie Tian was standing coldly high up in the sky, covered in blood. However, his eyes shone with an extremely bright light. Fighting against the demon armor of the army destroyer had seriously injured him. Even though he had ignited his blood chi to increase the power of his sword will, he was still unable to face the demon armor of the army destroyer head-on. The demon armor of the army destroyer was not only strong in attack, its defense was even more terrifying. Even though Nie Tian used the sun-defying sword, he was still unable to pose any threat to the demon armor of the army destroyer. Nie Tian, is this all you've got? Shadow Flame Ruinous Star's voice rang out. His voice was deep and filled with killing intent. Nietion felt the impact of the power in the air and was shocked. The demon armor of the army destroyer's aura was terrifying. It was as if there were countless wild beasts running in the air. Ha ha! Go to hell! Then, Shadow Flame Destroyer laughed maniacally. The demon armor of the army destroyer moved again. It punched out with both fists, causing the air to tremble. Fight! Nietion's eyes flickered and he roared. At this moment, he had no way out. He could only fight with his life on the line. Only with great power could he carve out a path of survival for himself. Boom! Boom! The demon armor of the army destroyer punched out with both fists, causing the air to tremble violently. The terrifying power seemed to want to split the sky in half. Kaboom! Boom! In the void, a huge crack appeared. It was incomparably terrifying. Boom! Facing this fatal attack, Nietion did not dare to be careless. His body shook and the 9 dragon veins in his body revolved crazily. Endless dragon chi gushed out and formed a sea of dragon chi behind him. In an instant, a giant red dragon was formed. Roar! The moment the giant red dragon appeared, it let out a deafening roar. In the next moment, the giant red dragon moved. It rolled out and raised its huge claws to meet the fists of the demon armor of the army destroyer. Bang! Bang! In the next moment, a thunderous rumble resounded in the sky. The heavens and the earth sank, and the dark clouds and the surroundings collapsed. The army destroyer demonic armor and the crimson dragon. This was a clash of absolute strength. It was extremely terrifying. Boom, boom, boom. Following that, violent energy gushed out in all directions, exploding in the air as if it wanted to destroy the heavens and earth. Following that, the crimson dragon retreated rapidly, its 2 dragon claws shattered. Nietion's expression was unsightly. The 9 dragon veins in his body started to circulate again. Dragon chi surged out and instantly restored the 2 dragon claws. Interesting. On the other side, Shadow Flame Ruinous Star smiled coldly. He hadn't expected that Nietion would actually be able to fight him with a dragon. However, in the next moment, the army destroyer demonic armor around his body released an even more terrifying power. A frightening dark energy appeared and condensed into a huge black blade in the air. Army Breaker Demon Saber. Shadow Flame Ruiner growled. The Army Breaker demon armor reached out with both hands, grabbing the black saber. Nietion, this is our final battle. There's no need for me to hold back any longer. Shadow Flame Ruiner laughed maniacally as he slashed out with the Army Breaker demon saber in his hands. A terrifying saber shadow appeared in the air. Rumble! Crack, crack, crack! In the next instant, the saber shadow slashed downwards, directly tearing the space apart. After which, the terrifying saber shadow slashed towards the crimson dragon, causing the heavens and earth to tremble. Nietion's countenance sank. There was no longer any place for him to retreat. He could only meet the attack head-on. At this moment, he once again ignited his blood and chi, activating the 9 dragon veins, erupting forth with even greater strength. Roar! The crimson dragon roared as its gigantic body rushed over. Rumble! Boom, boom, boom! In the next instant, the terrifying saber shadow slashed downwards. The gigantic body of the crimson dragon froze for a moment before exploding into pieces. Boundless draconic chi permeated the air, causing the spatial tear in the air to expand in size. The draconic chi had a weakening effect on space-time. The spatial tear continued to expand. Nietion sensed that something was amiss. Astral wings appeared on his back as he frantically retreated. Pung! However, he was still a step too slow. His body was struck by the violent energy, and he was flung through the air, leaving a trail of blood behind him. This! The spectators stared at the scene in the air as their eyes trembled uncontrollably. They were so shocked that they couldn't speak. Such a spectacular and tragic battle was beyond their imagination. Rumble, rumble, rumble. In the air, the sounds of explosions rang out unceasingly. Everything was chaotic, and the sun couldn't be seen. After a long time, the spatial tear gradually returned to normal. The army breaker demon saber in his hand stood in the air, resembling a devil god from hell. And on the other side, a blood-colored silhouette stood there. His entire body was drenched in blood, and there were countless wounds on his body. It was already a miracle that Niet Tion didn't die when he fought against the army breaker demon armor head-on with his 9 dragon veins. But right now, he was also heavily injured. The blood and draconic chi in his body had been depleted, and even his sword intent was almost depleted. Only the energy from his constellation was still abundant. But his eyes were still sharp, without the slightest hint of fear. Instead, they were burning with fighting spirit. Niet Tion. Yuluo looked at Niet Tion, her beautiful eyes flashing, and tears welled up in her eyes. This was the first time she had ever shed tears for a man. She didn't even know why she was crying. Oh no! Feng Shatong and the others looked at Niet Tion with nervous expressions, and their hearts were in their throats. The spectators looked at Niet Tion and the tragic scene, and they were all moved. Niet Tion's injuries are too severe. Just admit defeat. The Shadow Fire Destroyer is too powerful. Niet Tion only has the strength of a stage 9 demi-saint. It's already a miracle that he could last this long. If the fight goes on, he'll die. Niet Tion is very talented, but his strength is too weak. If they were the same level, the Shadow Fire Destroyer would definitely not be his match. The spectators discussed and looked at Niet Tion with somber eyes, not knowing what the latter would do next. Niet Tion, is this all you've got? Aren't you very talented? Didn't you break the record of the Heavens Choice platform? Didn't you kill me in the Doomsday Jungle? The Shadow Fire Destroyer stood high in the sky and shouted, "Now, you piece of trash, fight back." The angry roars showed how angry the Shadow Fire Destroyer was at Niet Tion. However, at this moment, Niet Tion was standing there quietly, a strange light surging in his eyes. At this moment, something very strange was happening inside Niet Tion's body. The original opus of Astral Souls, which had been silent for a long time in the Primal Chaos original coffin, suddenly reacted at this moment. There were many Astral Souls in the original opus of Astral Souls, and Niet Tion had used most of them a long time ago. However, as his strength increased, the Astral Souls in the original opus of Astral Souls became useless. At this moment, the original opus of Astral Souls seemed to have sensed something and was actually trembling, as if it was being slowly opened by a mysterious force. Niet Tion felt the strange movement of the Astral Souls and could not help but be puzzled, not knowing what was going on. Chapter 31:10. Astral Dragon, a Taboo Astral Soul. Niet Tion couldn't help but to stiffen when he heard the excited voice of the Ghost Emperor. He had no idea what a forbidden astral soul was, but the Ghost Emperor was so excited at this moment. It seemed like it was an extremely terrifying thing. Moreover, at this moment, the original Star Soul Codex had a strange reaction, causing Niet Tion to feel an indescribable excitement. The original Codex of Astral Souls recorded all the astral souls in the Star River realm. But later on, Niet Tion discovered that the power of astral souls of the highest grade wasn't very strong. Hence, he didn't pay much attention to the original Codex of Astral Souls. But now, the Ghost Emperor actually said that the Shadow Flame Destruction Astral Soul was a taboo astral soul. What did this mean exactly? A forbidden astral soul was also an astral soul. However, Niet Tion had never heard of a taboo astral soul in the original tome of Astral Souls. Niet Tion, this emperor doesn't have the time to explain too much to you. You only need to know that this fellow named Shadow Flame Destroyer has an extremely powerful astral soul in his body. The Ghost Emperor was extremely excited. His eyes gleamed with a fiery light. Niet Tion's expression couldn't help but turn heavy when he heard the Ghost Emperor's words. He asked in astonishment, could it be that the Shadow Flame Broken Army has fused with a forbidden astral soul? Something like that. The Ghost Emperor nodded and said, no wonder this guy can't die. Then what should I do now? Niet Tion frowned and asked in a deep voice. He was very sure that there must be some kind of connection between the forbidden astral souls and the original codex of astral souls. There was even a possibility that the forbidden astral souls were also astral souls from the original codex of astral souls. Use the power of the Shadow Flame Army Destroyer to reactivate the original Star Soul Tome. The Ghost Emperor spoke in a heavy tone. What do you mean? Nyetian frowned in confusion. From his point of view, the original Book of Star Souls had already been activated. Was there a need for it to be activated a second time? Unleash your full strength and force out the Army Destroyer Astral Soul from Shadow Flame Ruinous Star. The Ghost Emperor didn't have time to explain. Nyetian nodded, and his eyes instantly became firm. The strange movement of the Star Soul original codex caused him to feel that the star energy within his body had become lively. Waves of mysterious energy surged within his body, causing his injured martial physique to begin to recover. Nyetian, you piece of trash. Fight back. At this moment, Shadow Flame Army Breaker saw that Nyetian wasn't speaking, so he roared even more arrogantly. His gaze was cold and filled with killing intent. He looked at Nyetian from afar, as if he was looking at a dead man. In his eyes, Nyetian was no different from a dead man. Nyetian was severely injured at this time and no longer had the strength to fight back. Everyone looked at Nyetian with strange expressions. Looks like Nyetian is going to admit defeat. If this battle continues, he will definitely die. Yeah. There's no need to continue a battle where we can't even fight back. I don't think so. With the nature of the heavenly genius, he would never admit defeat. The crowd discussed, their eyes shining as they looked at Nyetian, as if they were waiting for something to happen. At this moment, everyone was hoping that Nyetian would bring out an even stronger trump card and explode with even greater power. Only then would he be worthy of the finals of the Heaven's Choice struggle. However, Nyetian was completely suppressed by Shadow Flame Army Breaker. It was already a miracle that he could last until now. Hoping for him to explode with power was clearly unrealistic. Trash. Since you no longer have the strength to fight back, then die. At this moment, the coldness in Shadow Flame Army Breaker's eyes intensified. With a fierce roar, the huge Army Breaker demonic armor charged towards Nyetian. Boom, boom, boom. The Army Breaker demonic armor's aura was boundless. As it charged forward, the heavens and earth trembled. Shadow Flame Army Breaker, since you want me to fight back, then I won't be polite. At this moment, Nyetian's lips twitched as he spoke in a low voice. His entire body's aura was suddenly released, soaring to the heavens as if it wanted to tear the heavens and earth apart. Boom! Violent energy surged out, and waves of majestic dragon chi were released. It was extremely terrifying. In an instant, Nyetian's aura rose to an unbelievable level. It was actually many times stronger than his previous aura. Shadow Flame Army Breaker could not help but exclaim in surprise when he sensed Nyetian's aura. How could he have imagined that Nyetian would be able to explode with such terrifying power despite being so heavily injured? It was as if a wave of energy had suddenly erupted from within Nyetian's body. So strong. The crowd was stunned by the scene before them, and they exclaimed in surprise. Their expectations had been fulfilled at this moment. Merging the power of the stars with the dragon chi. This is something I've never done before. Nyetian's lips curled up, and he smiled coldly. At this moment, he was merging the power of the stars with the dragon chi. Actually, he had tried to do this before, but to no avail. But now, the power of the stars seemed to have some sort of resonance with the original codex of astral souls. It became unusually active, and he was able to successfully merge it with the dragon chi. Boom! At this moment, the Army Breaker demon armor punched out. His fist was like a mountain, and when it came crashing down, the heavens and earth shook, and the space exploded. Bang! In the next instant, the Army Breaker demon armor's fist landed heavily on the Crimson Dragon. The space shook violently, and the two huge figures retreated at the same time. Shadow Flame Army Breaker steadied himself, and he was extremely surprised. The power of Niet Tion's dragon chi had actually increased by a few times, and he could face the army breaker demon armor head-on. Niet Tion really exploded. The crowd was stunned by the scene before them, and their eyes were burning with excitement as they exclaimed, "Roar!" High up in the sky, the crimson dragon roared angrily. The void trembled, and the heavens and earth trembled. Dark clouds rolled, as if doomsday had arrived. At this moment, the crimson dragon beneath Niet Tion's feet was actually 10,000 meters long. On its huge body, 3 types of power flowed simultaneously: chaotic flame, crimson lightning, and the power of the stars. After fusing with the power of the stars, the crimson dragon had already evolved into an astral dragon. Its aura and strength had a qualitative increase. Next, it's time to retaliate. Niet Tion stood on the back of the astral dragon, and a cold light flashed in his eyes as the corners of his lips curled up in a smile. Next, he wanted to force out the Army Breaker astral soul in Shadow Flame Army Breaker's body. Although he didn't know what the Army Breaker astral soul was exactly, he knew that it definitely had something to do with the original codex of astral souls. Roar! At this moment, the astral dragon roared in rage, as a violent draconic might shook the heavens and earth. In the next instant, the silhouette of the astral dragon moved. Its gigantic body was like a bolt of lightning, flashing with a blinding light as it directly rushed towards the Army Breaker demon armor. Niet Tion is going to retaliate. The gazes of the crowd were fixed on the astral dragon, as their eyes trembled uncontrollably. Their nerves were stretched taut, and their hearts were in their throats. This was the first time Niet Tion retaliated since the start of the battle against the Army Breaker. Courting death, Shadow Flame Army Breaker stared at the gigantic dragon in the air as his countenance sank. Killing intent flashed in his eyes as he roared. After which, with an intention of his will, the Army Breaker demon armor madly galloped forward, causing rumbling sounds to echo in the air, as though there were tens of thousands of primordial beasts galloping forward. Chapter 31:11. Army Destroyer Star Soul Boom. Boom! High up in the sky, the Army Destroyer demonic armor and the Star Dragon had gone berserk. They were like giant beasts, bursting with destructive power. Army Destroyer demonic blade kill. Shadow Flame Destroyer roared. The huge Army Destroyer demonic blade slashed down from the sky. A blade shadow that was tens of thousands of meters long appeared. Wherever the blade shadow passed, a terrible crack appeared in the space. Under the influence of the dragon chi, the space became much weaker. It could not withstand the violent attack of the Army Destroyer demonic blade. Roar! Almost at the same time, the Star Dragon roared angrily. The whole world became small at this moment, as if it was being trampled under the feet of a giant dragon. Buzz! The two huge forces slowly approached each other. Under the huge pressure, the void groaned, as if it would collapse in the next moment. The next moment, the two behemoths finally collided head-on. Under countless gazes, the mountain-like Army Destroyer demonic blade bombarded the body of the Star Dragon. Boom! The void shook, and suddenly, a terrifying wave that could be seen with the naked eye surged out. It formed a terrible ripple in the void, and everywhere it passed, the world became chaotic. Boom, boom, boom. In the space, terrible roars sounded continuously. The two terrible forces collided and resisted each other, but because they were too strong, they could not destroy each other in an instant. It became a stalemate. Everyone looked at this scene, and their eyes trembled violently. They all gasped, not knowing how to express the shock in their hearts. Niet Tion's strong counterattack had already made them extremely excited, but the confrontation in the sky was simply unbelievable. At this time, in the distant sky, several pairs of eyes were looking at the battle platform with different expressions. Niet Tion, you really amaze me. Heaven's Chosen One's beautiful eyes twinkled. Her pretty face was as calm as an ancient well, and no one could tell whether she was happy or angry. On the other side, the expressions of the people of Jewing Palace were very ugly. Their eyes were trembling, and they were obviously very worried. In particular, the Jueying Palace Master, Ing Qinyu, had an extremely ugly expression on his face. There was a strange light in his eyes, as if he was worried about something. Shadow Flame Army Destroyer, don't ever use the power of the Army Destroyer, Astral Soul. Ing Qinyu's eyes narrowed as he silently spoke in his heart. If the Shadow Flame Army Destroyer Astral Soul didn't activate the Army Destroyer Astral Soul, he would at most lose this battle. But if he were to use the Army Destroyer Star Soul, it would be the same as gifting it to Nie Tian. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. On the fighting platform, the terrifying confrontation of power continued. Violent air waves surged in the void, and the heavens and earth were in chaos. Nie Tian, you are no match for me. Shadow Flame Ruinous Star controlled the Army Destroyer magic armor and roared furiously. However, his expression was tense and extremely ugly. He didn't expect Nie Tian's strength to suddenly soar to such an extent. In a head-on clash of absolute strength, Shadow Flame Ruinous Star felt an immense pressure. Shadow Flame Army Breaker, you can't hold on any longer. I've said it before, if I can kill you once, I can kill you a second time. Even if you have 100 lives, or even 1,000 lives, you are still no match for me. Nie Tianling laughed in reply, his low and deep voice resounding in Shadow Flame Ruinous Star's ears like a clap of thunder. Boom! Roar! Following which, Nie Tian's body trembled as the astral dragon beneath his feet roared in rage. Draconic chi surged, and a towering draconic might was released, causing the heavens and earth to tremble. Boom! Pung pung pung. In the next instant, a terrifying explosion rang out in the void. The Army Destroyer Demonic Saber was actually unable to withstand the impact of the draconic chi and directly shattered in the air. This Shadow Flame Ruinous Star sensed that something was amiss. His countenance abruptly changed as he screamed in terror. Shadow Flame Army Breaker, you're dead for sure. Following which, Nie Tian's voice rang out once more, reverberating through the air. Shadow Flame Army Breaker, he's really going to lose. The eyes of the spectators trembled violently as they stared at this scene. Who would have thought that Nie Tian, who was originally in a disadvantageous position, would actually reverse the situation in the blink of an eye? Shadow Flame Army Breaker retreated repeatedly. Evidently, he was no longer able to face Nie Tian head-on. Shadow Flame Army Breaker's demonic armor was flung back over 10,000 meters. His eyes trembled as hesitation flickered in his eyes, as though he was contemplating something, unable to make a decision. Shadow Flame Army Breaker, stabilize your chi. You absolutely must not use your Army Destroyer Astral Soul. Ing Qinyu stared at Shadow Flame Army Breaker as his eyes trembled. Evidently, he was extremely nervous. If it wasn't for the Heaven's Choice Saint Envoy being present, he would definitely have spoken up. Shadow Flame Army Breaker, is this all you've got? Trash, why don't you retaliate? And at this moment, in the air above the platform, Nie Tian's voice rang out, sharp and low. These were the words Shadow Flame Army Breaker had shouted earlier. Now, that was being shouted out by Nie Tian. It sounded even more like mockery. Every single sentence, every single word was akin to a steel needle, heavily piercing into Shadow Flame Army Breaker's heart. Nie Tian. At this moment, Shadow Flame Army Breaker finally couldn't endure it any longer. With an explosive roar, his eyes shone with a scarlet light as his countenance contorted with malevolence, akin to that of a ferocious beast. At this moment, he couldn't endure it any longer. Be enraged, be enraged. Release the power of your Army Destroyer Astral Soul. Nie Tian's gaze trembled as his heart burned with passion. He was using words to provoke Shadow Flame Army Breaker into using his Army Destroyer Astral Soul. You forced me to do this. You're dead for sure. The ferocity in Shadow Flame Army Breaker's eyes instantly reached an extreme. He howled like a wolf, and after which, astral runes appeared around his body, gushing forth like raging waves, incomparably terrifying. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The astral runes were like raging waves, crashing into the air, after which they congregated in the air, forming a gigantic runic diagram that radiated an incomparably majestic energy. Nyetian stared at the gigantic runic diagram as his eyes involuntarily narrowed. His countenance was filled with incomparable shock. From the runic diagram, he could sense an extremely familiar aura. It was the aura of an astral soul. He was extremely certain that this gigantic runic diagram was an astral soul. However, compared to the astral souls that appeared in the original codex, this astral soul was even more intricate, complex, and majestic. It was as though every single astral rune contained an inexhaustible amount of energy. Army Destroyer, Astral Soul. At this moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice rang out, filled with shock and excitement. Even his voice was trembling as he exclaimed, "Army Destroyer, Astral Soul. It's truly the Army Destroyer, Astral Soul." He was extremely certain that the runic diagram that Shadowflame Army Breaker released was indeed the Army Destroyer, Astral Soul. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that the legendary Forbidden Astral Soul would actually appear in this world. Nyetian, you're dead for sure. And after the Shadowflame Army Breaker released his Army Destroyer Astral Soul, his aura surged several times over. His eyes shone with a blood-red killing intent as he roared in a low voice. At this moment, Nyetian finally reacted, but his eyes were trembling. Chapter 31:15. Primal Star Spirit. As soon as Nyetian spoke, the entire place fell silent. Everyone's eyes were fixed on him. Their expressions were clearly saying, "Are you crazy?" In everyone's eyes, for Nyetian to reject the invitation after what the Heaven's Choice Venerable had said was definitely the actions of a madman. The crowd could not understand what Nyetian was thinking. Why would he reject such a good opportunity? He believed that any rational person present would not reject the invitation. If Nyetian followed the Heaven's Choice Venerable into the Saint's world, with his status as a Star Chief and Saint, his starting point would be very high. In the future, he would not be any weaker than the geniuses of the Saint's world. But Nyetian rejected it without hesitation, as if to him, the opportunity in front of him was as cheap as cabbages that could be thrown away. The Heaven's Choice Venerable looked at Nyetian, her beautiful eyes twinkling. She seemed to be thinking about something and did not say anything. At this moment, the Heaven's Choice Venerable stepped forward and stared fiercely at Nyetian, growling, "Nyetian, the Venerable has personally invited you to join the Heaven's Choice Venerable and enter the Saint's world. Don't be unappreciative." Venerable Heaven's Choice Venerable. So what if I'm unappreciative? Nyetian looked at the Heaven's Choice Venerable and smiled. I'll give up my status as a Star Chief and Saint. What's wrong with that? You? The Heaven's Choice Venerable's face darkened and his eyebrows rose. He was clearly furious, but did not know what to say. Nyetian was right. He did have the right to give up his status as a Star Chief. The Star Chief had the right to join the Heaven's Choice Venerable, but he also had the right to give up his status. Even if the Heaven's Choice Venerable invited him, there was nothing wrong with Nyetian rejecting him. Everyone looked at Nyetian with complicated expressions. They had not expected things to develop to this point. Is Nyetian a fool or a madman? He actually gave up such a good opportunity and offended the Heaven's Choice Venerable and the Heaven's Choice Venerable. Why? I really don't know what Nyetian is thinking. If he stays here, will the Juying Palace Master let him go? I don't think there are many experts here who can fight against the Juying Temple Master. Nyetian is courting death by refusing the Heaven's Chosen Venerable. Even if the Heaven's Choice Venerable doesn't kill him, he's going to die. What an idiot. The crowd discussed in low voices. They looked at Nyetian with suspicion. The crowd, which had been cheering for Nyetian just a moment ago, was now looking down on him. Venerable, venerable. Venerable, 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 venerable. Venerable, 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 venade. Venerable, Tian. Venerable, venerable. Venerable, venerable, Tian s venerable had. Venerable, 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 Tion star, venerable was. Tion guessed that the reason why the Heaven's Chosen One wanted him to join the Heaven's Chosen One so urgently was not simple. Perhaps Cher had something to do with it, but Tion must have something to do with it as well. Vaguely, Tion smelled a conspiracy coming from the Heaven's Chosen Venerable. Tion, since you don't want to join Heaven's choice, I won't force you. At this moment, the Heaven's Chosen One finally spoke. He looked at Ng Qianyu and the others with a strange gaze. Then his gaze landed on Tion. You're on your own. Thank you, Heaven's Chosen One, for your reminder. Tion smiled calmly. Of course, he knew that once Heaven's choice came to an end, he would have to face the threat of a powerful opponent. Right now, he was already thinking about how to leave. Ng Qianyu, Huangchu Evil, and the others heaved a long sigh of relief when they saw that Tion didn't join Heaven's choice. Of course, they hoped that Tion would stay. After all, Tion had star origin stones on him. Next, the Heaven's Chosen One and the Heaven's Chosen Envoy began to evaluate the results of the other Heaven's Chosen Ones. Then, they would pick the top 12, the 12 Heaven's Chosen Stars. All the Heaven's Chosen Stars had the right to join Heaven's choice. They would follow the Heaven's Chosen One and the Heaven's Chosen One and enter the sacred world. The selection of the 12 Heaven's Chosen Stars was very cautious. It would take 3 days. During these 3 days, Tion would be safe. For the next 3 days, Tion was prepared to study the Army Destroyer Star Soul. He came to the side of Feng Shutong and the others and spoke with them for a while. Then, he went to a quiet place. Before the Heaven's Chosen One and the Heaven's Chosen One left, no matter how arrogant Ng Qianyu and the others were, they wouldn't dare to act against Tion. Tion sat cross-legged and entered a state of cultivation. His divine sense entered the primal chaos origin coffin. At this moment, the primal chaos origin coffin was extremely quiet. The 9-level primal chaos beast was sealed by the Heaven's Chosen One, causing the primal chaos origin coffin to appear empty. Original Codex of Astral Souls. With a thought from Tion, the original Codex of Astral Souls appeared. It floated in midair and slowly floated in front of him. Tion drew in a deep breath and slowly opened the original Codex of Astral Souls. Once again, he saw the Army Destroyer Star Soul. Sensing the aura of the Army Destroyer Star Soul, his eyes involuntarily trembled. The Army Destroyer Astral Soul, when compared to the previous Astral Souls, had the same astral aura. However, this Astral Soul was even more profound and vast, giving off a feeling of boundlessness. It was as though each and every one of the astral runes contained the entire starry sky. What tier is the Army Destroyer Star Soul exactly? It's actually so powerful. Tion frowned as he mumbled. Being able to sense the Army Destroyer Star Soul at such a close distance allowed him to understand how powerful it was. He simply didn't dare to believe that such a terrifying astral soul actually existed in this world. After which, Tion tried to open the next page of the original Codex of Astral Souls. However, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't open it. It was as though the original Codex of Astral Souls was sealed by some sort of energy. Tion, the original Codex of Astral Souls has already been opened. The previous Astral Souls are no longer present. If you want to open the second page, you have to use a primeval Astral Soul. Just when Tion was filled with bewilderment, the voice of the Ghost Emperor rang out. Primeval Astral Soul? Tion froze as he asked in astonishment, "What is a primeval astral soul?" Before this, the Ghost Emperor spoke of a taboo astral soul. Now, he spoke of a primeval astral soul. What did this mean? Primeval astral souls are taboo astral souls. The Ghost Emperor fell silent for a moment before continuing. It's rumored that when an astral origin stone was born, many primeval astral souls would be born together with it. Those primeval astral souls are the very first astral souls. All the astral souls in the original Codex of Astral Souls originated from these primeval astral souls. Because the astral soul of the astral stone is too powerful, It's also known as a taboo astral soul. Chapter 31:16. Wolf Slaying. Within the chaotic origin coffin, Niet Tion frowned with a puzzled expression. Only now did he know that all the astral souls in the original codex of astral souls were derived from the primal astral souls, which were also known as the forbidden astral souls. No wonder when the Army Destroyer astral soul returned to the origin codex, the other astral souls all disappeared. However, he didn't understand. If a primal astral soul and an astral origin stone were born together, then why didn't he obtain a primal astral soul when his astral origin stone had awakened? Instead, he had obtained a primal astral soul from the body of Shadow Flame Ruinous Star. I don't know the answer to that question either. The Ghost Emperor frowned. After a long time, he said, the astral origin stone must have changed owners several times. During this process, all the primordial astral souls were lost. The relationship between a star origin stone and a primordial star soul is like that of a master and servant. However, primordial astral souls don't depend on astral origin stones to exist. They can exist independently. Niet Tion nodded, agreeing with the Ghost Emperor. After that, his eyes narrowed as he asked, Ghost Emperor, do you know how many primordial astral souls were born together with astral origin stones? I don't know. The Ghost Emperor shook his head and said, how many primeval star souls are there? I'm afraid even the Starry Sky Saint rulers before you might not know. However, this emperor knows that each and every primordial astral soul possesses an extremely powerful strength. It's precisely because primeval astral souls are too powerful that they are known as forbidden astral souls. Niet Tion nodded. After that, his eyes flashed as he asked, Ghost Emperor, how strong are the forbidden astral souls exactly? Previously, even if his astral soul origin codex was a 9th grade astral soul, its might was limited. He was worried that the forbidden astral souls only had an undeserved reputation. In reality, they weren't as powerful as the legends made them out to be. Niet Tion, your majesty knows what you're thinking. The Ghost Emperor saw through Niet Tion's thoughts and said, actually, the astral souls recorded in the original Star Soul Codex are also very powerful. It's just that your personal strength is too weak, and you're unable to unleash the full power of your astral souls. What do you mean? Niet Tion frowned in confusion. The eyes of the Ghost Emperor narrowed as he spoke. The strength of an astral soul, other than the grade of the astral soul, the most important factor is the astral energy it contains. Because your comprehension of astral energy is limited, in addition to the fact that the seal on your Starstreak Dark Seal has yet to be unsealed, the power of your astral souls is very weak. If this was the astral soul inscribed by the astral Saint Lord, I'm afraid even sages wouldn't be able to block it. In fact, even the astral souls inscribed by that envoy, named Hua Iru, are enough to threaten peak stage false saint experts. Hearing the Ghost Emperor's words, Niet Tion frowned speechlessly. So it was not that Xinghan was too weak, but he was too weak. After all, an astral soul was inscribed using astral energy. If the astral trace Dark Seal wasn't unsealed, the astral energy wouldn't be able to unleash its true might. Hence, the astral soul inscribed would naturally be very weak. Moreover, Niet Tion's comprehension of the power of the stars was only at the elementary level. It was just like how the same power of the stars exerted by him was completely different from that exerted by Li Guang, Tongchun, or Hua Iru. Ghost Emperor, I've already unsealed 2 of the astral trace Dark Seals. At this moment, Niet Tion's gaze flickered as he continued, given my current strength, how powerful would the Army Destroyer Astral Soul be if I were to inscribe it? The Army Destroyer Astral Soul was already extremely powerful when used by the Shadow Flame Destroyer Astral Soul. Niet Tion had personally witnessed it. And because of the existence of the Army Destroyer Astral Soul, the Shadow Flame Destroyer Astral Soul could even be revived after death. He was extremely excited. If he were to inscribe the Army Destroyer Astral Soul, how powerful would it be? If the Army Destroyer Astral Soul could be used to fight against experts like Ying Qianyu, that would be for the best. Niet Tion, Do you know that the Army Destroyer astral soul is actually an incomplete taboo astral soul? The Ghost Emperor frowned as he suddenly spoke. Incomplete? Nyation froze as his brows furrowed in astonishment. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that the Army Destroyer astral soul was actually incomplete. An incomplete taboo astral soul was already able to allow the Shadow Flame Destroyer astral soul to reach such a terrifying level. If it was a complete taboo astral soul, how powerful would it be? A truly complete taboo astral soul should be called the Slaughter Destroyer Wolf astral soul. It's formed from the 7 Slaughter astral souls, the Army Destroyer astral soul, and the Voracious Wolf astral soul. The Ghost Emperor frowned as he continued. The Army Destroyer astral soul is merely one of the 3 parts of the Slaughter Destroyer astral soul. The power of the Army Destroyer astral soul alone isn't even a 10th of the Slaughter Destroyer astral soul. And the power unleashed by the Shadow Flame Destroyer astral soul isn't even a 100th of the Army Destroyer astral soul. When Nyation heard the Ghost Emperor's words, his gaze involuntarily froze as he was rendered speechless. So it turned out that the Shadow Flame Destroyer astral soul wasn't able to unleash the true power of the Army Destroyer astral soul. But from the perspective of Nyation, the Shadow Flame Destroyer astral soul was already extremely powerful. The might of a complete Slaughter Destroyer astral soul was simply unimaginable. Nyation, given your current strength, you should be able to use the astral energy from the 2 star scars to inscribe the Army Destroyer astral soul. With that, you should be able to fight against ordinary 9th-ranked pseudo-saints. A moment later, the Ghost Emperor continued, his eyes gleaming with sharpness. Really? Nyation's eyes abruptly narrowed as an expression of uncontrollable excitement appeared on his face. The Army Destroyer astral soul was able to fight against a 9th-ranked pseudo-saint. This had greatly exceeded Nyation's expectations. Don't be too excited. It isn't so easy to inscribe a taboo astral soul. The Ghost Emperor bitterly laughed as he continued. A taboo astral soul isn't directly inscribed using astral energy. Rather, it's inscribed using astral runes. If you want to inscribe a taboo astral soul, you have to first condense astral energy into astral runes. After that, you can use the astral runes to slowly inscribe the taboo astral soul. Astral runes. Nyation froze for a moment before he furrowed his brows. He immediately recalled that when the Shadow Flame Army Destroyer astral soul released the Army Destroyer astral soul, what appeared wasn't astral energy, but astral runes. Not only that, when he sensed the Army Destroyer astral soul, what he saw were astral runes and not astral energy. Nyation, with your current comprehension of astral energy, it's going to be extremely difficult to condense astral runes. At this moment, the Ghost Emperor sighed as he spoke in a heavy tone. Nyation frowned as his countenance turned somewhat unsightly. It seemed like the Ghost Emperor didn't think highly of him. No matter what, I have to give it a try. After which, Nyation's eyes flickered as he spoke. I hope I can condense astral runes within 3 days. 3 days? The Ghost Emperor's eyes narrowed when he heard Nyation's words. After which, he shook his head and said, Nyation, you're thinking too much. It's already not bad if you can condense astral runes within 3 months. Nyation's face was filled with black lines, and he was speechless for a long time. Chapter 31:17. Astral Rune. Nyation didn't say anything else. He entered the astral realm and began to condense astral runes using astral energy. In the astral realm, Nyation sensed the astral energy. He controlled the 2 streams of astral energy and attempted to fuse them together. However, every time the 2 streams of astral energy were about to fuse together, a mysterious force would appear and separate them. A few moments later, beads of sweat appeared on Nyation's forehead. Only now did Nyation realize. How difficult was it to condense astral runes? Just 2 streams of astral energy was already so difficult. This had exceeded his expectations. He could sense that each astral rune in the Army Destroyer astral soul was condensed from at least 10,000 streams of astral energy. Some of the astral runes even contained close to 10 million streams of astral energy. However, Niet Tion didn't give up. Instead, he tried again and again. If the first time didn't work, he tried again. If the second time didn't work, he tried again. If the third time didn't work, he tried 10 times. If the 10th time didn't work, he tried 100 times, 1,000 times, 10,000 times, until he succeeded. Niet Tion, it's not that easy to fuse astral energy. The Ghost Emperor looked at Niet Tion and sighed, shaking his head. In fact, he was already optimistic when he said that Niet Tion would be able to condense astral runes within 3 months. He just didn't want to give Niet Tion too much of a blow. Half a day passed. Success! In the astral realm, Niet Tion's exclamation suddenly rang out. The 2 streams of astral energy surged on his palms. They first separated, then fused together. The Ghost Emperor's eyes trembled violently when he saw this scene. He couldn't believe his eyes. Niet Tion really managed to fuse the 2 streams of astral energy together. How was this possible? It had only been half a day. Fusing astral energy didn't just depend on willpower. It also depended on one's comprehension and control of astral energy. He couldn't believe that Niet Tion's control of star power had already reached such a high level. Lord Ghost Emperor, my comprehension ability is not bad, right? Niet Tion was incomparably excited. The 2 streams of star power in his palms separated and fused again, as if responding to the Ghost Emperor's previous distrust. Not bad at all. Of course, Ghost Emperor wasn't angry. After calming down, he laughed excitedly and said, I really didn't expect your understanding of the power of the stars to have reached such a level. Looks like this emperor has underestimated you. Niet Tion laughed loudly and said, Ghost Emperor, just you wait, I will definitely be able to condense the first star rune. Then, Niet Tion was full of enthusiasm and continued to merge the power of the stars. The Ghost Emperor's eyes flickered as he looked at Niet Tion and said inwardly, Niet Tion, even though your perception is extraordinary, it'll still take you at least a month to form true star magical symbols. 2 days later, the first star rune is a success. In the Star River realm, Niet Tion shouted excitedly. His bright eyes were shining with joy. On his palm, a star symbol floated like a tadpole, but it was incomparably exquisite. It was formed by the fusion of countless stars' power. The Ghost Emperor looked at Niet Tion and gasped. He was completely stunned and couldn't believe the scene in front of him. Niet Tion only used less than 3 days to condense a star rune. This was too terrifying. Niet Tion's comprehension ability was so high that it made people's hair stand on end. If he didn't see it with his own eyes, the Ghost Emperor would never believe such a thing. He could faintly feel that there was a mysterious connection between Niet Tion and the Star Origin Stone. Perhaps this was the reason why the Star Origin Stone chose Niet Tion. It took me 2.5 days to finally condense a star rune. It's really not easy. After a while, Niet Tion became much colder. He let out a deep breath and said, the star rune he had condensed was formed by the fusion of 10,000 streams of star power. However, on the surface of the Army Destroyer astral soul, there were thousands of astral runes. Not only that, each astral rune was formed from the fusion of over 10,000 streams of astral energy. From this, it could be seen how difficult it was for Niet Tion to carve the Army Destroyer star soul. However, this was the first star rune he condensed. As the saying goes, everything is difficult at the beginning. It was normal that he would take a long time. Niet Tion was confident that he could condense the second star rune in half a day. However, he didn't have much time left. The 12 Heaven's Chosen stars would be chosen very soon. At that time, the Heaven's Chosen end would be over. After thinking for a while, Niet Tion stood up and ended his cultivation. His face didn't look good. Instead, it was very pale. Condensing the star rune had consumed a lot of his mental energy, so he was very tired. He took a deep breath and swallowed a concentrated godly pill. Then his silhouette flashed, and he appeared beside Feng Shutong and the others. "Nie Tian, are you okay?" Feng Shutong frowned and asked curiously when he saw Nie Tian's pale expression. "I'm fine." Nie Tian smiled. Seeing that Feng Shutong's expression wasn't bad, he smiled and asked, "Old Feng, is your heaven's chosen curse okay?" "I'm fine." Feng Shutong chuckled, his eyes filled with passion. Because Nie Tian and the others performed very well, the heaven's chosen saint envoy had already reversed the curse in Feng Shutong's body. For a long period of time, he wouldn't be threatened by the curse. At that moment, Nie Tian suddenly sensed that someone was staring at him. He couldn't help but frown as he turned around to look. What he saw was a young man in white. He was handsome and had an imposing appearance. He was sizing him up with a strange look. The man in white looked very young. He should be below 10,000 years old. However, his strength had already reached the 5th rank pseudo-sage. Beside the man in white stood a beautiful figure. It was none other than the Rakshasa Saintess Yuluo. Who is this person? Nie Tian couldn't help but frown as he looked at the man in white. He was sure that this man in white was not the chosen one. He had just appeared. The heaven's chosen path was about to end. Why would this man in white suddenly appear? He stood beside Yuluo. He should be from the Rakshasa temple. However, he didn't have a Rakshasa mask on his face. It was strange. What made Nie Tian even more confused was that this man in white kept staring at him. There was anger in his eyes, but no killing intent. He seemed to be thinking about something. At this time, the man in white moved. He wanted to walk towards Nie Tian, but was stopped by Yuluo. The two of them whispered. No one knew what they were talking about. Nie Tian frowned. He was confused. However, he didn't walk over. This man in white appeared when the heaven's chosen path was about to end. His identity was definitely not simple, and he seemed to be here for Nie Tian. Then, everything was peaceful. Half a day later, the heaven's chosen saint envoy appeared in front of everyone, attracting everyone's attention. Chapter 31:18. Everyone looked at the heaven's choice saint envoy, waiting for him to announce the 12 chosen stars. Everyone, after the saint envoy and the venerable's comprehensive evaluation, the 12 chosen stars have been chosen. At this moment, the heaven's choice saint envoy announced in a loud voice, the 12 chosen stars are Nie Tian, Imo, Zhangwedian, Ling Chenyu, Yudong, Yuluo, Guoli, Chong Sanjing, Tang Chun, Mu Tianlei, Yuling Shi, and Feng Qi. Chosen star, chosen star, chosen star. As soon as the heaven's choice saint envoy finished speaking, the entire place was filled with thunderous cheers. Nie Tian was already numb to such a scene and did not have much of a reaction on his face. Although he had given up on the heaven's choice star chief, his name was still on the 12 chosen stars. However, he would not join the heaven's choice star, nor would he go to the holy world. At this moment, the heaven's choice saint envoy waved his hand, signaling for the crowd to be quiet. He continued, the 12 chosen stars are the most talented warriors in the heaven's choice end stage. According to the rules of the heaven's choice end stage, the 12 of you have the right to join the heaven's choice end stage and enter the holy world. Now, please come up and receive your heaven's choice holy badges. As soon as the saint envoy finished speaking, many figures shot up into the sky and came to the side of the heaven's choice saint envoy. However, the crowd realized that there were not 12 people who went up to receive their heaven's choice holy badges. Beside Nie Tian, Imo and Feng Qi did not move either. Don't the two of you want to enter the holy world? Nie Tian looked at Imo and Feng Qi and frowned. I have other ways to enter the holy world. Moreover, Qingwan is not by my side. I have to go back to the 4 strange regions to look for her. Imo smiled and nodded. I have other ways to enter the holy world. Moreover, Qingwan is not by my side. I have to go back to the 4 strange regions to look for her. Nie Tian nodded. He had wanted to ask about Qingwan before, but he never had the chance. Now that he knew Nie Qingwan was fine, he was relieved. With my current strength, entering the Saints' world too early might not be a good thing. I better wait. Feng Qi smiled and glanced at Si Xiaoya. Nie Tian nodded. He knew that Feng Qi could not let go of Si Xiaoya, which was why he refused to go to the Saints' world. You guys. Feng Shutong looked at Tian and the others, let out a long sigh, and shook his head. To him, entering the saint's world was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, so why would he give it up? Then, Tian looked at the people of Rakshasa Temple of 10 Directions on the other side. He found it very strange that Yuluo had actually given up on the opportunity to go to the saint's world. Actually, Yuluo had been hiding it from the Rakshasa Palace Master, secretly participating in the Heaven's chosen final path. Moreover, her identity determined that she could not go to the sacred world. The Rakshasa Saintess was too important to the Rakshasa Temple of 10 Directions. She could not leave just like that. Very quickly, the Heaven's Choice Saint Envoy finished giving out the Heaven's Choice badges. His eyes flickered as he glanced at EMO and the others. In a loud voice, he said, "Are you sure you want to give up your Heaven's Chosen Star status?" EMO and the others didn't say anything, which was a tacit agreement. The Heaven's Choice Saint Envoy did not insist. He looked at the Heaven's Choice Saint Envoy and bowed. "Sir Saint Envoy, we can leave now." "Yes." The Heaven's Chosen One nodded slightly and glanced at Tian coldly. It seemed like it wanted to say something, but didn't. Then, under countless gazes, the Heaven's Chosen Honorable and the Heaven's Chosen Saint Envoy took the Heaven's Chosen Star and left through the void. Everyone watched as the space-time rift in the sky slowly closed, and their gazes gradually became strange. Then, the crowd shifted their attention to Tian and the others and started to discuss among themselves. "Sigh, these people are really too much. They got the Star of Heaven's Choice, but they didn't join it. They gave up on such a good opportunity. What a waste. Yeah, it's such a good opportunity to enter the Saint's world. How nice would it be for me? What's the point of saying so much? Who asked him to be talented and strong? He has the capital to be willful. Tian didn't join Heaven's Choice, but he chose death. He killed the people of Decimo Rakshasa Temple and Juing Temple. How could those two forces let him leave alive?" As the crowd spoke, they all focused their gazes on Tian. Tian's performance on the Heaven's Choice Star had been too amazing. It was inevitable that he would be hated by others. At that moment, most people were ready to watch a good show. They were waiting for the people of Decimo Rakshasa Temple and Juing Temple to attack Tian. Tian didn't have any strong cultivators with him, so he couldn't leave alive. At that moment, the people of Juing Temple began to move. They came to Tian's side. Tian is. Feng Shutong frowned. His old face was extremely ugly, and he couldn't speak. His ability wasn't to fight, so he couldn't fight against the people of Juing Temple. Even if he was at the peak of the False Saint Peak, he wouldn't be a match for Ing Qianyu. He could already sense that Ing Qianyu's strength was terrifying. He estimated that in the entire 10,000 Territories Guild, perhaps only their leader could fight Ing Qianyu. Tian was still calm. He motioned for Feng Shutong and the others to step back. His eyes flashed as he looked at Ing Qianyu and said, "Juing Temple Master, are you going to make a move?" "Tian, this palace lord will give you a chance to live. As long as you hand over the Star Essence Stones and the Army Destroyer Star Soul, this palace lord can spare your life." Ing Qianyu stared at Tian as he spoke with a heavy gaze. "And if I don't?" Tian's lips curled up as he said indifferently. He was panicking, but he was trying hard to remain calm. "Die." Ing Qianyu stared at Tian with a frosty look in his eyes as he spat out a single word filled with killing intent. At this moment, everyone felt a terrifying killing intent, causing their hearts to tremble uncontrollably. "Juing Temple Master, I'm sorry. You won't be able to kill him today." However, as soon as Ing Qianyu finished speaking, another voice rang out. It was low and calm, resounding through the void. Then, a white-robed figure appeared and landed beside Tian. "Who is this?" When everyone saw the white-robed figure, they couldn't help but tremble violently, their faces filled with surprise. The white-robed figure looked very young, and he was very strong. He was already a rank 5 false saint, but in front of Ing Qianyu, he seemed very weak. "HM?" Tian looked at the white-robed man beside him and couldn't help but let out a cry of surprise. This white-robed man was the one who had been standing beside Yuluo. He hadn't expected that the white-robed man would stand out at this moment and confront Ing Qianyu. "Who are you?" Ing Qianyu looked at the white-robed man in front of him and felt a familiar aura from him. He couldn't help but frown and ask in a deep voice, "Desolate Ghost." The white-robed man's face was calm. His eyes flickered slightly as he said his name. "Who is Desolate Ghost to you?" Ing Qianyu couldn't help but frown when he heard the white-robed man's name. "Since you've already guessed it, why bother asking?" Desolate Ghost's lips twitched as he replied indifferently. Chapter 31:20. Rakshasa Temple Supervisor Nitian looked at the black-robed figure that suddenly appeared. His pupils involuntarily shrank, and his face froze. An unfamiliar face appeared in front of him. However, he sensed an unusually familiar aura from this unfamiliar face. Outside the black-robed man's body, Nitian sensed a faint but very distinct aura of the power of the stars. Power of the stars! Nitian's heart skipped a beat, and he was extremely shocked. He had never expected that the black-robed man would have the aura of the power of the stars. How was this possible? Who was this black-robed man? Why did he have the aura of the power of the stars? Just as Nitian was feeling puzzled, the black-robed man's gaze swept over him. It clearly paused for a few seconds, and there was a hint of a strange smile in his eyes. Following that, the power of the stars on the black-robed man disappeared completely. Nitian tried to sense again, but could not sense any aura at all. He deliberately, "Let me sense the aura of the power of the stars." Nitian's eyes narrowed, and he immediately understood. The power of the stars on the black-robed man disappeared after it appeared. It was obvious that he deliberately let Nitian sense it. Obviously, he was sending some kind of message to Nitian, or in other words, expressing goodwill. However, Nitian did not know who this black-robed man was. However, after the black-robed man appeared and greeted Ing Qianyu directly, Ing Qianyu even revealed a shocked expression in front of him. This undoubtedly showed that the black-robed man's strength and status were very high. "Teacher." At this moment, the Rakshasa devil's son, Desolate Ghost, spoke up and bowed deeply to the black-robed man respectfully. "Lord Temple Supervisor." Almost at the same time, the three Rakshasa kings looked at the black-robed man. Their eyes were burning with excitement and some fear at the same time. "Lord Temple Supervisor is here." On the other side, Rakshasa Saintess Yuluo's beautiful eyes trembled with surprise. When Nitian saw the reaction of the Rakshasa Temple people, his eyes narrowed and his heart sank. Judging from the actions of Desolate Ghost Boundless and the others, this black-clothed man's status was very high. Even the three Rakshasa kings were very respectful in front of the black-clothed man. Furthermore, the black-clothed man was Boundless Ghost Desolate's teacher. This undoubtedly elevated his status to a higher level. At this moment, Nitian had a faint guess in his heart that this hall supervisor of the Rakshasa Temple of 10 Directions was here for him. "How is this possible? You're still alive." At this time, Ing Qianyu opened his mouth. Although he had regained his composure, his eyes were flickering and his voice was trembling slightly. He couldn't believe his eyes. The warden of the 10 Directions Rakshasa Temple was still alive. "Ing Qianyu, you don't seem happy to see an old friend." The Rakshasa Temple Lord smiled faintly. The corner of his lips curled up into a strange arc. His eyes were filled with a sharp light that contained a hint of threat. Ing Qianyu looked at the Rakshasa Hall Master and finally regained his calm as he spoke in a deep voice. "Dongjun, this Hall Master truly did not expect that you would be able to survive until now. Ing Qianyu, let's not beat around the bush." The Rakshasa Hall Master laughed and said without hesitation, "I'm here today to take Nitian away. If you, Ing Qianyu, think that you can stop me, then feel free to attack me." The eyes of the crowd trembled and their faces were filled with astonishment when they heard the words of the Rakshasa Hall Master. They had no idea who the Rakshasa Hall Master was, nor did they know the relationship between the Rakshasa Hall Master and Ing Qianyu. However, judging from the aura displayed by the Rakshasa Hall Master as words, he was not afraid of Ing Chinyu. In fact, Ing Chinyu's reaction showed that he was afraid of the Rakshasa Hall Master. This caused the crowd to be confused. Who exactly was this Rakshasa Hall Master, and why was he so afraid of Ing Chinyu? Even the leader of the Rakshasa Hall Master only had the same status as Ing Chinyu. Although the words of the Rakshasa Hall Master were calm, every word he uttered was filled with a strong sense of threat. Ing Chinyu's expression was extremely dark. It was obvious that he was pondering about something. He had known the Rakshasa Hall Master for a long time and was well aware of the latter's strength. He didn't understand how the Rakshasa Hall Master had managed to survive until now, but he knew that the Rakshasa Hall Master wasn't any weaker than him. If he made a move now, he could at most block one of the Rakshasa Hall Master. Even if the Shadow Moon Greedy Wolf Star Soul was released, he could only barely resist 3 Rakshasa Kings. However, there was still Nyetian eyeing him like a tiger watching its prey. He was a huge threat. Although Nyetian was very weak, he had the Astral Origin Stone and the Astral Soul Original Tome, which could absorb the Greedy Wolf Star Soul. The Jueying Temple had already lost the Army Destroyer Star Soul today, so they didn't want to lose the Greedy Wolf Star Soul as well. Ing Chinyu, since you're not saying anything, I'll take it that you agree. When the Rakshasa Hall Master saw that Ing Chinyu hadn't spoken for a long time, he smiled faintly and said, "I'll take Nyetian with me." Then, he turned and glanced at Nyetian, smiled faintly, and prepared to leave. "How dare you?" But at that moment, a low roar rang out. A violent figure appeared and shouted, "Even the Rakshasa Hall Master doesn't dare to be so arrogant in front of our Hall Master. Who do you think you are? How dare you be so arrogant?" This figure was none other than the Shadow Moon Greedy Wolf. Boom! As his voice fell, his body shook and a towering aura surged up, crashing into the void as if it wanted to tear the heavens and the earth apart. He's going to make a move. When the crowd saw this, their eyes trembled and they cried out. Looking at the Shadow Moon Greedy Wolf's posture, it was obvious that he was about to make a move. The Rakshasa Temple of 10 Directions and the Jueying Shrine were facing off against each other. This was definitely an exciting scene that couldn't be missed. The crowd's eyes blazed, clearly anticipating something. Greedy Wolf. However, just as the Shadow Moon Greedy Wolf's voice fell, Ing Chinyu's eyes suddenly narrowed and he screamed. But it was too late. "You're courting death." The Rakshasa Hall Master's eyes suddenly turned cold and the corners of his mouth twitched. Then, a black light appeared. It was extremely sharp and it shot out from the void. In an instant, the Shadow Moon Greedy Wolf felt a terrible, murderous intent descend. It was like an invisible giant hand had directly enveloped his entire body. In the next moment, before he could even react, the black light flew past his eyes and left a glaring wound on his face that was so deep that his bones could be seen. Blood gushed out and dyed half of the Shadow Moon Greedy Wolf's face red. This sudden scene made everyone's eyes tremble and they gasped. Their eyes were filled with deep fear as they looked at the Rakshasa Hall Master. What a terrible power! When Nyetian saw this, his eyes trembled and he exclaimed in his heart. The Shadow Moon Greedy Wolf's strength was already considered top-notch, but in front of the Rakshasa Hall Master, he couldn't even fight back. It was too frightening. "Old thing, you deserve to die." At that moment, the Shadow Moon Greedy Wolf froze in place for a few seconds before he suddenly reacted. Like a berserk beast, he roared, and then his aura surged out like a raging wave. But the next moment, a strange scene occurred. Chapter 31:21. The Temple Master's Invitation. The sudden scene made everyone's eyes tremble and their expressions stiffen. What happened to the Shadow Moon Greedy Wolf's face was so strange that everyone could not help but shudder in fear. Then, an even more terrifying scene happened. The dark runes on the Shadow Moon Greedy Wolf's face suddenly went berserk and tore his face open like a terrifying blade. The sudden pain was too much for the Shadow Moon Greedy Wolf to bear. He howled like a pig being slaughtered in front of everyone. Tan Lang. When Ing Chinyu saw this, his eyes trembled and he exclaimed, "A mere greedy wolf planet dares to speak to me like that? You must have a death wish," the Rakshasa Temple Master said in a cold voice. His eyes flashed with malice. Dongjun, the greedy wolf, is a junior. Are you really going to kill him in front of so many people? Ing Chinyu frowned and growled at the Rakshasa temple master. Ing Chinyu, if this level of Rakshasa sigil can kill him, then there is no need for the greedy wolf planet to exist, the Rakshasa temple master replied calmly with a smile. Let's go. Ing Chinyu's expression darkened. He hesitated for a moment, then roared and left with the Shadow Moon greedy wolf. It was obvious that the Rakshasa temple master did not want to kill the greedy wolf. He only wanted to teach him a lesson. However, with so many Rakshasa sigils seeping into the greedy wolf's body, even if he did not die, he would suffer. Ing Chinyu and the others left very quickly and disappeared without a trace in an instant. Everyone was in a daze and could not react for a long time. Who would have thought that the temple master of the Jueying temple master would leave just like that? The crowd was even more curious. Who was this Rakshasa temple master? How could he be so powerful? Everyone, the heaven's choice's end is over. Are you still not going to leave? The Rakshasa temple master said as he swept his gaze across everyone present. In the blink of an eye, a frosty aura spread out in the void, enveloping everyone. Everyone immediately felt a chill in their hearts, and they actually shivered inexplicably. It was obvious that the Rakshasa temple master was sending a dangerous warning to everyone. However, everyone was shocked and could not react for a long time. You all still aren't leaving? Could it be that you want to die? Meanwhile, right at this time, Huang Chu's figure appeared. He took a step forward, his roar like thunder. The berserk voice rang out like a clap of thunder, causing everyone to react in an instant. Let's go. If we don't leave now, I'm afraid that Lord Palace Supervisor will kill us. Even Jueying Hall Master is afraid of this hall supervisor. Let's leave quickly. I came here first. Let me go first. Immediately, the crowd was thrown into chaos. Everyone shouted and left one after another. A moment later, everyone left, leaving only the people of the 10-direction Rakshasa Temple and Nyetian's group. The Rakshasa Temple Lord had been keeping an eye on Nyetian. Clearly, he would not let him leave. When Feng Shu Tong and the others saw that Nyetian didn't leave, they also stayed behind. You can leave now. At this time, the Rakshasa Temple Lord's gaze fell on Feng Shu Tong and the others. He spoke in a cold voice. Although his voice was calm, it revealed an undefiable dominance. This! Feng Shu Tong's face darkened. He looked at Nyetian awkwardly. Elder Feng, you can leave first. Nyetian nodded slightly and said indifferently. But Feng Shu Tong frowned, his expression ugly. No buts. Nyetian laughed and said confidently, Don't worry. I'll be fine. All right. Feng Shu Tong sighed helplessly and could only nod. He knew that even if they stayed, it would be useless. Instead, they would become Nyetian's burden. EMO, Feng Chi, and the others also understood this. After saying goodbye to Nyetian, they left with Feng Shu Tong. Seeing that Feng Shu Tong and the others had left, Nyetian let out a sigh of relief. Temple Lord, you're here for me, right? Next, Nyetian looked at the Rakshasa Temple Lord and asked with a faint smile. The Rakshasa Temple Lord nodded. His eyes emitted a sharp glow as he carefully inspected Nyetian, as if he was searching for something. After a long time, his gaze returned to normal, and he said calmly, Nyetian, you're much calmer than I thought. Temple Lord, are you complimenting me? Nyetian raised an eyebrow and laughed in a provocative manner. How dare you? On the other side, the boundless ghost seemed to dislike Nyetian's attitude. He growled and said in a cold tone, Brat, you must be respectful in front of the Temple Lord. Nyetian frowned and glanced at the boundless ghost. The corner of his mouth twitched, and he said with a faint smile, He's your Temple Lord, not mine. Why should I be respectful? Arrogant. The boundless ghost's sword-like eyebrows were raised. He was obviously a little angry. His eyes emitted a cold light, and there was actually a murderous intent. Boundless. But at this moment, the Rakshasa Temple Lord spoke. He waved his hand, indicating that the boundless ghost should not be agitated, and said with a faint smile, Nyetian is right. He's not from the Rakshasa Temple. There's no need to be respectful in front of me. Temple Lord is indeed reasonable. Nyetian smiled faintly, then looked at the Rakshasa Temple Lord. Without beating around the bush, he said directly, "May I ask why Temple Lord has come to see me in person?" The Rakshasa, Temple Lord, and the boundless ghost appeared almost out of nowhere. Both of them were here for Nyetian. The status of these two people was extremely high in the Rakshasa temple. For them to come to see Nyetian, there must be something important. "Nyetian, please come with me to the Decimo territory." The Rakshasa temple lord did not answer Nyetian, but said with a faint smile, "Decimo territory?" Nyetian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he guessed that the Decimo territory should be the territory where the Rakshasa temple was located. He knew that the Rakshasa temple had always been interested in the star origin stone. Therefore, the Rakshasa temple lord's invitation made him unconsciously cautious. "Temple lord, what if I don't go?" After thinking for a moment, the corner of Nyetian's mouth curled up, and he said with a faint smile, "Nyetian, do you think you have the right to refuse?" Before the Rakshasa temple lord could speak, the boundless ghost next to him spoke. His voice was extremely low and cold. Nyetian frowned, and couldn't help but glance at the boundless ghost. For some reason, the boundless ghost felt an inexplicable hostility towards him. Chapter 31:22. Decimal Realms. Nyetian narrowed his eyes when he heard the Rakshasa Hall supervisor's words. He was confused. The Rakshasa Hall supervisor's attitude confused him. Given the current situation, Nyetian had no choice but to follow the people of the 10 Directions Rakshasa Temple. However, the Rakshasa Hall supervisor was being cautious and even made a promise to Nyetian, which made Nyetian feel strange. Not only Nyetian, but the 3 Rakshasa kings, Desolate Ghost, and Yulua also looked at the Rakshasa Hall supervisor with a strange expression. There was no need for the Rakshasa Hall supervisor to be so polite to Nyetian. After all, Nyetian was no different from prisoner now. Another thing that surprised Nyetian was the Rakshasa Hall supervisor's words. The Rakshasa Hall supervisor wanted to see him. He obviously did not know the Rakshasa Hall supervisor. Why would the Rakshasa Hall supervisor want to see him? If he wanted the stellar origin stones, the Rakshasa Hall supervisor could force Nyetian to hand over the stellar origin stones. There was no need for him to see the Rakshasa Hall supervisor. Could it be that the Rakshasa Hall supervisor needs my help? Nyetian's eyes narrowed as a guess formed in his mind. Then, he looked at the Rakshasa Hall supervisor and said with a faint smile, "Since the Rakshasa Hall supervisor is so sincere, it would be impolite of me to refuse." He knew that this trip to the Decimal Realms was inevitable. He only made it sound easy on the surface. "Thank you." The Rakshasa Hall supervisor smiled, and his eyes flickered strangely. In an instant, Nyetian suddenly sensed a familiar aura from the Rakshasa Hall supervisor. His heart skipped a beat. That aura is so familiar. Nyetian thought to himself. He looked at the Rakshasa Hall supervisor with a strange expression and thought to himself, "Who is this Rakshasa Hall supervisor? Let's go." At this moment, the Rakshasa Hall supervisor returned to normal. He smiled and nodded to Huangchu and the others. Then, Huangchu opened a space-time scroll. Boom! In the void, a huge force of space-time surged out, instantly condensing into a small space-time formation in the air. Nyetian sensed that the space-time array contained an extremely surging space-time aura. "Little friend Nyetian, please." The Rakshasa Hall master smiled faintly and allowed Nyetian to be the first to enter the array. Nyetian did not stand on ceremony. He took a step forward and entered the formation. Following that, the Rakshasa Temple's supervisor, the Rakshasa Demon Son, the Rakshasa Saintess, the 3 Rakshasa Kings, and the other heavens chosen ones of the 10 Directions Rakshasa Temple entered the array. After entering the array, Nyetian felt a mysterious aura. The surrounding space was filled with a dazzling rainbow light. It was very strange. Following that, he felt the light in the space growing stronger and more blinding. The space-time pressure in the void also became stronger and stronger. At some point, Nietion's eyes couldn't take it anymore, and he closed them. Not long after, he felt the light in the air weaken. His eyes suddenly opened, and what appeared in front of him was a whole new world. At this moment, Nietion was high up in the sky. Dark clouds and fierce gales were swirling in the air. Below him were numerous mountain ranges that stretched as far as the eye could see, like giant beasts lying on the ground. The world here was not much different from the 9 regions and the Sacred Soul region. However, the aura of divine power in the space was very strong, making one feel very comfortable. Almost all the pores on one's body would open up involuntarily and absorb the divine power. Cultivating here, a martial artist's cultivation speed must be very fast. The corner of Nietion's mouth curled up slightly as he thought to himself, "Little friend Nietion, welcome to one of the territories at the edge of the myriad regions, the 10 Directions domain." The Rakshasa Hall Master looked at Nietion and smiled faintly. Nietion nodded in silence. So the 10 Directions domain was the domain at the edge of the myriad regions. He had seen a map of the entire myriad regions in the Book of 9 Primordial. The entire myriad regions was like a huge domain system. The 9 regions were the core region of the myriad regions, and the other territories revolved around the 9 regions. However, although the 9 regions were the core region, space and time were suppressed by other territories, and the concentration of divine power was very low. As a result, the martial artists of the 9 regions were generally very weak. However, the structure of space and time in the 9 regions was special. When martial artists from other territories entered the 9 regions, they would be strongly suppressed. Therefore, experts from other territories would not go to the 9 regions. Nietion, let's go. At this moment, the Rakshasa Hall Master smiled faintly and led Nietion directly to the 10 Directions Rakshasa Hall. Half a day later, Nietion and the others landed on a huge square. Nietion's figure landed, and he was shocked to see the huge square in front of him. This square was hundreds of thousands of meters wide, and there were huge stone pillars around it, like giants that could support the heavens. He could not understand what such a huge square was used for. Boundless. At this moment, the Rakshasa Hall Master suddenly spoke to desolate Ghost Boundless. "Next, you will make arrangements for young friend Nietion." "Yes." Desolate Ghost Boundless nodded, and a strange light flashed in his eyes. Then, the Rakshasa Hall Master smiled faintly in Nietion and said, "Young friend Nietion, I still have some matters to attend to, so I will take my leave first." Nietion could not help but be stunned. He thought that the Rakshasa Hall Master would directly bring him to see the Rakshasa Hall Master. Then, the Rakshasa Hall Master glanced at the 3 Rakshasa Kings and said with a smile, "The 3 of you, young friend Nietion, is an honored guest personally invited by Lord Temple Master. Lord Temple Master, and I do not wish for anything to happen to him." However, his eyes were very gloomy, and there was a cold glint in them. His words were clearly a reminder to the 3 Rakshasa Kings that they absolutely could not harm Nietion. This subordinate understands. The 3 Rakshasa Kings were smart people. Of course, they understood the meaning behind the Rakshasa Hall Master's words. Among the 3 Rakshasa Kings, the one who hated Nietion the most was the variant ghost Rakshasa King. Nietion had killed the variant ghost demonic infant Yenwuyu, who was the variant ghost Rakshasa King's proudest disciple. Originally, the variant ghost Rakshasa King had planned to personally kill Nietion after the Heaven's Choice ended. However, the appearance of the Rakshasa Hall Master and the Rakshasa Devil's Son destroyed his plan. At this moment, no matter how much he hated Nietion and how much he wanted to kill Nietion, he had to endure it. Even if he had the guts to ignore the reminder from the Rakshasa Hall Master, he would not dare to ignore it. "Young friend Nietion, I will take my leave. We will meet again soon." The Rakshasa Hall Master smiled faintly. With a strange look in his eyes, he added, "Also, there will be a special welcome ceremony tonight. I hope young friend Nietion will like it." With that, the Rakshasa Hall Master turned around and left. Chapter 31:23. Stay away from her. The figure of the Rakshasa temple enforcer quickly disappeared, but the uneasiness in Nyetion's heart grew stronger. He had a vague feeling that the moment he stepped into the Rakshasa temple of 10 directions, he had been caught up in a huge conspiracy. He was not sure what role the Rakshasa temple enforcer played in this conspiracy. Kid, tonight's welcoming ceremony, you will definitely enjoy it. At this moment, the Rakshasa king suddenly looked at Nyetion with a cold glint in his eyes. I hope you won't lose too badly. Nyetion looked at the Rakshasa king and could not help but frown. Isn't it just a welcoming ceremony? Don't lose too badly? What does that mean? At this moment, the uneasiness in Nyetion's heart grew stronger. Rakshasa king, let's go. The Rakshasa king had an evil smile in his eyes. He wanted to say something, but was stopped by Desolate Beginnings Evil, who said with a dark look. The Rakshasa king seemed a little unwilling, but he still nodded. Then, the 3 Rakshasa kings bid farewell to Desolate Ghost and Yulaw and left. Boundless, what are you going to do with Nyetion? After the 3 Rakshasa kings left, Yuluo's beautiful eyes flickered, and her beautiful brows knit together slightly as she looked at Desolate Ghost Boundless. Yuluo, it must have been hard for you to participate in the Heaven's Choice final path. Go rest early. Desolate Ghost did not answer Yuluo's question. Instead, he said with a dark and cold expression. Yuluo's eyes narrowed. She seemed to be used to Desolate Ghost's way of speaking and was not angry. Instead, she looked at Nyetion and hesitated for a moment before saying, Nyetion, I'll be leaving first. Be careful. Thank you for your concern, Your Highness. Nyetion smiled and nodded. Yuluo nodded, but did not leave immediately. Instead, her bright eyes flickered, as if she had something to say to Nyetion. Yuluo, it's time for you to leave. Desolate Ghost's sword-like brows knit together as he spoke with a cold and indifferent expression. Yuluo had a helpless expression on her face. She took one last look at Nyetion and left reluctantly. Nyetion frowned as he watched Yuluo's departing figure. The corners of his mouth involuntarily lifted into a faint smile. He could tell that Yuluo was truly concerned about him. In this completely unfamiliar place, there was someone who cared about him so much. This made Nyetion's heart surge with an inexplicable warmth. Although Yuluo was the Rakshasa, holy maiden of the 10 Directions Rakshasa temple, this little girl was definitely not a bad person. Nyetion could even see Cher's shadow in Yuluo. The two of them shared a common trait, innocence. Have you seen enough? Moments later, Yuluo's figure completely disappeared. Desolate Ghost suddenly opened his mouth and asked coldly as he stared at Nyetion with a cold gaze. Nyetion went blank for a moment, confusion filling his face. Let me ask you, have you seen enough of Yuluo? Desolate Ghost's eyes were as cold as ice as he asked solemnly. What does this have to do with you? Nyetion frowned and replied coldly. Yuluo is the holy maiden of the 10 Directions Rakshasa temple. She's not someone you can taint. The coldness in Desolate Ghost's eyes intensified. He stared at Nyetion like a wolf and said word by word, You better stay away from her. Boom. As his voice fell, his body suddenly erupted with a violent power that was as vigorous as the sea. It surged in the void, violent and overbearing. Nyetion's eyes narrowed. His face could not help but darken as he asked coldly, Are you threatening me? Nyetion and the boundless ghost Desolate didn't have any interactions before, but Desolate Ghost had an inexplicable hostility towards him. He could not understand this. At this moment, he seemed to understand. It seemed like Desolate Ghost's hostility towards him was because of Yuluo. If you think of it as a threat, that's fine too. Desolate Ghost let out a low roar. His figure suddenly moved, and he thrust out a palm. The violent palm energy was like a raging sea, pressing down on Nyetion like a raging wave. Nyetion's eyes narrowed again. He did not expect Desolate Ghost to attack him directly. In the next moment, he reacted. Starlight Heaven Slash appeared in his hand. Sword intent surged from his body as he slashed forward. Kaboom! In midair, two terrifying forces collided. Neation and Desolate Ghost's figures retreated 100 meters at the same time. Then, they stood still at the same time. Desolate Ghost's figure stood still. His cold eyes couldn't help but freeze in surprise. He clearly did not expect Neation's strength to be so strong. "You don't have the right to threaten me with such strength." Neation looked at Desolate Ghost and sneered. "Is that so?" Desolate Ghost frowned. His body trembled and his aura surged again. Suddenly, a terrifying force surged into the space like a raging wave, majestic and majestic. "Take this." In the next instant, Desolate Ghost let out a low roar and slammed out a palm. Boom! In the void, a mountain-like palm shadow appeared. With a whistling sound, it slammed towards Neation. Neation felt the pressure coming towards him. His eyes narrowed slightly as his heart was filled with shock. Desolate Ghost was indeed the Rakshasa Devil Son. Although he only had the strength of a 5th-rank pseudo-sage, his aura was stronger than a 7th-rank pseudo-sage. Just from the aura alone, Desolate Ghost's strength was comparable to the Shadowfire Army Destroyer Astral Soul that was released earlier. "Rakshasa Devil Son, you are very strong. However, I, Neation, am not a pushover." Neation's eyes narrowed as he said in a low voice. Sword intent surged from his body as he slashed out with Starlight Heaven Slash. Boom! Then, in midair, the palm shadow and the sword shadow collided. With a deafening sound, a violent force exploded and turned into raging waves, as if it was trying to devour something that was too big. Neation and Desolate Ghost retreated a few thousand meters at the same time and stabilized themselves in the air at the same time. Blood could be seen at the corner of their mouths. This clash turned out to be a lose-lose situation for both sides. "Neation, you are indeed not a weakling." Desolate Ghost wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and said in a low voice, "This is not the time for a battle between us. I look forward to the next time we fight." After saying that, his figure moved and landed on the public square. Neation's eyes narrowed slightly as he landed on the public square as well. Needless to say, Desolate Ghost's strength was indeed very strong. In the previous attack, Neation had used the Sky Sword Reversing Sun to block Desolate Ghost's palm. Desolate Ghost, on the other hand, had only casually thrown out a palm. However, Neation did not use his powerful trump card. Therefore, it was hard to say who was stronger between the two. What surprised Neation the most was that the Boundless Ghost's sudden attack and the sudden stop were both baffling to him. Moreover, he could tell that Desolate Ghost did not have any romantic feelings for Yulaw. So why did he threaten him? Just as Neation was feeling puzzled, Desolate Ghost said in a low voice, "Follow me." Chapter 31-24. A gift under the guidance of Desolate Ghost. Neation soon came to a secluded courtyard. "For this period of time, you will live here first," Desolate Ghost said, cold with his back facing Neation. "Thank you." Neation nodded slightly and thanked him. Although he had just fought with Desolate Ghost, it did not mean that the latter was his enemy. Moreover, the battle just now made Neation have a new understanding of Desolate Ghost. Although Desolate Ghost looked cold as ice on the surface, he was definitely not a cruel and bloodthirsty person. At least in the exchange just now, Neation did not feel the slightest killing intent from Desolate Ghost. He felt that Desolate Ghost was warning him about something and did not want to kill him. Tonight's welcome ceremony, you have to be careful. Following that, Desolate Ghost turned to leave, but just after taking 2 steps, he suddenly turned back and said to Neation with a gloomy gaze, "Go as far as you can, don't force yourself." With that said, he strode away again. Neation was suddenly stunned, frowned, and said in surprise, "What do you mean? What exactly was this welcome ceremony? Why did it sound so strange?" Previously, the variant ghost Rakshasa King's reaction made Neation feel uneasy, and now Desolate Ghost's words made him even more puzzled. Could it be that there was something strange about this so-called welcome ceremony? You will know soon. At this moment, Desolate Ghost's voice sounded again. Neation raised his head fiercely, but his figure had already disappeared. "Welcome ceremony. What exactly is it? Nyetian frowned, a puzzled look on his face. He strode into the small courtyard and calmed down a lot. It was useless to think so much now. He could only take one step at a time. Nyetian looked at the small courtyard in front of him and calmed down. Since he came to Rakshasa Temple of 10 Directions, there was an inexplicable uneasiness in his heart. The entire Rakshasa Temple gave him a strange feeling. There were thousands of mysteries in his heart. Of all the doubts he had, the thing that confused him the most was the identity of the Rakshasa Hall's administrator. He sensed the aura of star power from the Rakshasa Temple enforcer. Besides, he could sense that the attitude of the Rakshasa Hall supervisor toward him was extremely strange. He guessed that the reason why he came to the 10 Directions Rakshasa Hall was that all of this was secretly arranged by the Rakshasa Hall supervisor. What he could not understand was why the Rakshasa Palace administrator would do this. Nyetian, you don't have to think too much right now. While Nyetian was feeling confused, the ghost monarch's voice sounded, I feel that the palace supervisor has no ill intentions toward you. Whether or not you can survive in the 10 Directions Rakshasa Hall will depend on this person. Nyetian nodded. He had the same feeling in his heart. Next, Nyetian calmed down a lot and began to cultivate. He had already reached pseudo-sage level 1, and it would be difficult for him to make another breakthrough in the near future. Therefore, his next focus was to carve the Army Destroyer Astral Soul. The Ghost Monarch had said that even if the Army Destroyer Astral Soul was not a complete forbidden Astral Soul, once it was carved, it would be enough to deal with a pseudo-sage level 9 Astral Soul. Nyetian desperately needed to carve out the Army Destroyer Astral Soul as his trump card to save his life. In the blink of an eye, half a day passed and night fell. Nyetian stood in the courtyard, the corners of his mouth curling up into a faint smile. This time, he only used half a day to successfully condense a star rune. Although this speed was still very slow, it was a few times faster than the first star rune. Nyetian believed that as long as he continued to condense the star rune, his speed would only get faster in the future. At this moment, Nyetian furrowed his eyebrows, and the corners of his mouth twitched as he muttered, that weird welcoming ceremony should have started, right? He was not afraid of the welcoming ceremony, but was looking forward to it. Nyetian, watch out. At that moment, the Ghost Monarch seemed to have sensed something and suddenly exclaimed, Huh? Nyetian's eyes narrowed as he exclaimed in surprise. Boom! In the next moment, the void suddenly trembled, and a powerful force pressed down on Nyetian. Nyetian reacted quickly and raised his head. The scene before him caused his eyes to tremble violently. In midair, a giant black net appeared and shrouded him like the night sky. At that moment, Nyetian felt the space around him become extremely heavy, and a terrifying pressure came from all directions. In an instant, he felt as if he couldn't breathe. Damn it! Following that, Nyetian let out a low roar, and a pair of astral soul wings appeared on his back. He wanted to escape, but to his horror, the space around him seemed to be locked by a force, making it impossible for him to move. In fact, even his Yuan meridian was completely suppressed. Boom! In the next moment, the giant black net descended and enveloped Nyetian's figure. Then, before Nyetian could react, the giant black net tightened and bound him tightly. Follow me. In the next moment, a deep voice echoed out from the void, and an enormous force enveloped Nyetian and lifted him into the air like a giant hand. Nyetian could not resist at all and could only follow the person. After a while, Nyetian arrived at a dark space. What is this place? He looked around, frowned, and asked in surprise. This is where I usually cultivate. Following that, a deep voice was heard, and a figure dressed in black appeared next to Nyetian. Nyetian's pupils shrank involuntarily as he stared at the black-robed figure in front of him. Lord Hall Superintendent. He did not expect that the person who brought him here was the Rakshasa Temple Deacon. Send him to be tied up. The Rakshasa Temple Deacon smiled and said, Yes. A deep voice was heard in the sky. In the next instant, the black net on Nyetian's body disappeared. Slave Xing, you can leave first. The Rakshasa Temple Deacon spoke again. Yes. The same reply was heard. The space vibrated for a while, but soon returned to normal. Nietian regained his freedom, but his face was dark and cold. He stared at the Rakshasa temple deacon and said, "Rakshasa temple deacon, you claim that I am an esteemed guest of the Rakshasa temple of 10 directions. What do you mean by bringing me here?" "Future star sky, sacred leader, don't be so hot-tempered." The Rakshasa temple deacon smiled at Nietian and said, Nietian's eyes flickered when he heard the Rakshasa temple deacon's words. He asked in surprise, "What did you call me?" "Future star sky, sacred leader." The Rakshasa temple deacon smiled again and said, "Did I call you wrong? How did you?" Nietian's eyes widened in surprise. Following that, he blurted out in shock, "Could it be that you are?" "It doesn't matter who I am." The Rakshasa temple deacon twitched his lips and reached out his palm. A vortex of starlight appeared on his palm, and he said, "What's important is that I have a small gift for the future star sky, sacred leader." "A small gift?" Nietian stared at the vortex of starlight in the Rakshasa temple deacon's hand. Chapter 31:25. Azure Dragon, Astral Soul. The Ghost Emperor stared at the astral vortex in the Rakshasa hall's hand. His eyes were burning with passion as he exclaimed, "Forbidden astral soul." He was very sure that the astral vortex in the Rakshasa hall's hand was a forbidden astral soul. Furthermore, it was a complete forbidden astral soul. Forbidden astral soul. Nietian exclaimed in shock when he heard the Ghost Emperor's words. In the next instant, he sensed the aura of the astral vortex, and his face stiffened. The astral vortex before him was only the size of a fist, but the aura it contained was as vast as the vast starry sky. It was as though the tiny vortex contained a boundless galaxy. Previously, Nietian had also sensed a similar aura from the Broken Army astral soul. However, the Broken Army astral soul was clearly much weaker than the Broken Army astral soul. It was obvious that this astral vortex was a forbidden astral soul that was even stronger than the Broken Army astral soul. Nietian, judging from your reaction, you should have some understanding of forbidden astral souls. After a moment, when Nietian had calmed down, the Rakshasa hall's supervisor spoke with a faint smile. "Seems like there's an expert hidden by your side." "Lore Hall's supervisor, who exactly are you?" Nietian became cold and stared at the Rakshasa hall's supervisor as he asked in a low voice, "Don't you already know my identity? Why do you still ask?" The demon temple head smiled faintly. His eyes shone like torches as he looked at Nietian and said, "I didn't expect that you could actually reach this step. Are you really an astral emissary?" Nietian frowned as he looked at the Rakshasa hall's supervisor. He had already guessed that the Rakshasa hall's supervisor was an astral emissary. Furthermore, the fact that the Rakshasa hall's supervisor took out a forbidden astral soul made him feel that the possibility was even higher. However, when he confirmed it, he still felt extremely shocked. "Yes." The Rakshasa temple deacon looked at Nietian and did not deny it. His lips curled into a faint smile as he nodded slightly. "Hall supervisor, which starry sky emissary are you?" Nietian let out a long breath and calmed down. Then he asked with blazing eyes, "I the starry sky." The Rakshasa hall deacon did not give a direct answer. Instead, he said 4 words. "Starry sky I?" Nietian's eyes narrowed as he exclaimed in surprise. He then reacted and murmured, "So the palace supervisor is the second starry sky messenger." Li Guangtongshan's primordial spirit was a heaven-shrouding totem that appeared in the first layer of the Star River. Hence, he was the first star emissary. Hua Iru's nascent spirit was the Hellfire Crucible, which made him the third emissary of the starry sky. The eye of the starry sky of the Rakshasa hall's chief appeared in the second layer of the Star River, so he must be the second starry sky emissary. Nietian didn't know much about the eye of the starry sky and didn't use it much later. At this moment, he was a little curious as to how strong the Rakshasa temple deity would be after integrating with the eye of the starry sky. Hua Iru wasn't a combat-type cultivator. After fusing with the Hellfire Crucible, he could fight against sages. The Rakshasa temple deacon was already very strong. After fusing with the Hellfire Crucible, he would be even stronger. Nyetian, how much do you know about forbidden astral souls? At this moment, the Rakshasa Hall Deacon looked at Nyetian as he asked. Not much. Nyetian laughed bitterly. If I didn't encounter the Shadow Fire Army Destroyer on the Heaven's Choice path, I wouldn't even know about the existence of forbidden astral souls. I only know that forbidden astral souls are primeval astral souls that are born from astral origin stones. The other astral souls are all derived from primeval astral souls. Because primeval astral souls are too powerful, they are known as forbidden astral souls. Nyetian told the Ghost Emperor everything he knew. This information was told to him by him. In other words, the only forbidden astral soul you have come into contact with is the Army Destroyer astral soul, right? The Rakshasa Hall Deacon frowned as he asked with a heavy gaze. MHM. Nyetian nodded his head, after which he fixed his gaze on the astral whirlpool in the hands of the Rakshasa Hall Deacon. An expression of unconcealable excitement could be seen on his face as he asked, Lord Deacon, the forbidden astral soul in your hands is much stronger than the Army Destroyer astral soul. What astral soul is this? The astral soul in my hands is one of the 4 deity astral souls, the Azure Dragon astral soul. The Rakshasa Hall Deacon smiled faintly. With a wave of his hand, the Azure Dragon astral soul soared into the air and suddenly trembled, after which it transformed into countless astral inscriptions that circulated in the air. Roar! In the next instant, the countless astral inscriptions condensed into a gigantic azure dragon in the air. The azure dragon roared in rage, causing the entire heavens and earth to tremble. What a powerful force! Nyetian stared at the gigantic azure dragon, as his eyes involuntarily trembled. The body of the azure dragon astral soul exceeded 1,000 meters. It wasn't considered too big, but the aura it exuded was boundless and extremely realistic, as though it was made of flesh and blood. Every time it breathed out, it would cause the heavens and earth to tremble. Nyetian could clearly feel that the Azure Dragon astral soul was much stronger than the Crimson Dragon formed by his 9 dragon veins. Nyetian, this Hall Deacon is only slightly activating the Azure Dragon astral soul. At this moment, the Rakshasa Hall Deacon waved his hand, and the Azure Dragon astral soul's body trembled, and very quickly, it returned to its original state. Lord Deacon, if the power of the Azure Dragon astral soul is completely unleashed, how strong would it be? Nyetian's eyes trembled as he asked with a face filled with passion. Very, very strong. The Rakshasa Hall Deacon laughed. This Hall Deacon is an astral envoy, and is unable to fuse with an astral soul. Hence, it's impossible for me to unleash the true power of the Azure Dragon astral soul. Following which, his eyes flickered as he looked at Nyetian strangely. As for the current you, even if you inscribe the Azure Dragon astral soul, you will not be able to unleash its true power. Why? Nyetian's gaze froze, and he couldn't help but feel puzzled. He was the future astral Saint Lord. If even he couldn't unleash the true power of the Azure Dragon astral soul, then who else could? Nyetian, the forbidden astral soul, is born from the astral origin stone, but there is no absolute relationship between the two. In other words, the existence of the forbidden astral soul does not depend on the astral origin stone. The Rakshasa Hall Deacon narrowed his eyes and continued. Only those who have truly fused with the forbidden astral soul will be able to unleash the full power of the forbidden astral soul. So that's how it is. Nyetian's expression sank, and his heart sank. So it turned out that the forbidden astral soul was so powerful, it had exceeded his expectations. Although the forbidden astral soul does not depend on the astral origin stone, there is an extremely close relationship between the two. Following which, the Rakshasa Hall Deacon continued. Only the astral Saint Lord can completely fuse a forbidden astral soul with a cultivator. And the person who has fused with the forbidden astral soul is called a Star Lord. Furthermore, The forbidden astral soul is perfectly countered by the astral origin stone. Hence, the astral Saint Lord has the authority to choose the Star Lord. When Yation heard the Rakshasa Hall Deacon's words, his eyes couldn't help but heat up. He was extremely excited as he muttered, "In that case, whoever I fuse with the forbidden astral soul will be the Star Lord. Yes, it is like this." The Rakshasa Hall Deacon nodded and smiled faintly. He stared at Nyetian and thought to himself, "Nyetian, reconstructing the astral saint world is a huge matter. It is impossible to accomplish it with just your strength alone. Next, not only do you have to find the lost forbidden astral souls, but you also have to find a suitable master for each forbidden astral soul and make them your Star Lords.